Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Tormund. The first part of the morning was spent by marching to battle against the Bolton fuckers' army. The southern men marched together with drums to keep their pace and form, while the free folk just marched how they pleased. There wasn't time for breakfast, so everyone had to eat their food on the way. The weathers were kind to keep the fields mostly clear of snow. However, that didn't mean that there wasn't something awful waiting for them all when they got there. When the army marched out of the covers of trees to the open field, they all saw several crosses with a person flayed from head to toe and set aflame. The Bolton numbers were greater than theirs were. There was no denying it. His ranks of men and horses were organized and waiting for them. Their banners were raised high. Flayed men, gray chains, and white suns were all that showed on his side, while black mooses, spotted checkers, lizard lions, long axes, iron woods, bears, and dire wolves decorated over the Stark army. The free folk had no banners, but if they did, they would be flying just as high as the others. The Stark army was fewer in number, but more a united people. The two armies faced each other on the fields outside of Winterfell as the cold winds of the morning brushed gently. Two armies of one kingdom, ready to clash steel, Jon Snow and the true army of the North, and Ramsay Bolton with the traitors of the North. But everything was still in the calm before the storm. Tormund waited for whatever was to happen to happen. The free folk would have charged in already, roaring so loud the gods would tremble. But this was a southern battle. It had to be fought with wits first, before impulsive action. But he couldn't stop wondering what they were all waiting for. He didn't say anything, though. He stood by with his men and waited. It was quiet so much that it was aggravating. Something didn't feel right. In the distance, at the front of the Bolton army, a lone figure on a horse could be seen coming to the front of his army. After years of scouting for crows from the bottom of the wall, Tormund could see perfectly that it was that Ramsay fucker. Ramsay had dismounted his horse and was pulled a rope behind him. On the other end was a boy dressed in ragged furs that had to be Jon's half-brother, Rickon Stark. He was tall for just being a boy. Ramsay brought Rickon right next to him. He drew a dagger and held it up high so that all could see. Jon dismounted his own horse and walked closer as if looking to see if what he was seeing was really happening. Tormund could feel Jon hold his breath in the moments that came from seeing the blade. Everyone watched as Ramsay brought the blade down, but he didn't stab or cut Rickon on. Instead, Ramsay cut Rickon's bounds. Tormund became confused. What was this man planning? He didn't know much about him except he was a man. He made the word cruelty sound like a joke. Ramsay moved Rickon forward and sent him on his way to the Stark army just like that. But then a boy was given to him and Rickon started to run. No one chased after him and no one except Ramsay ready to fire arrows. Jon quickly mounted his horse and began spurring it forward, going after his brother as fast as he could. This didn't feel right. Tormund kept his eyes fixed on Ramsay as he began shooting arrows and saw that he hardly put any effort into the first ones. He didn't even look where he was shooting. But the whole time he did, he was smiling. This was all just a game to him. As the two sons of Ned Stark got closer, Ramsay began to actually aim his shots. He kept missing, but Tormund had seen Ygritte and her skill and knew that this man was still only toying with his target. He was going to kill the boy. Tormund turned to one of the giants in the army, standing with the free folk. Ep2. The giant wasn't the mightiest of the bunch, but he was the only archer among them. Save the boy. Shoot the one with the bow. Ep2 quickly moved forward. The free folk and southern men moved aside as the ground shook from the steps of a giant, and he drew one of his spear, long arrows, and knocked his enormous bow. Jon was nearly to his brother, but Ramsay was knocking another arrow. This one was for the kill. Ep2 drew back his arrow and aimed carefully for only a second before releasing it. The giant's arrow made a noise that cut through the air like a sword through flesh, and it flew faster than any of the southern men could believe. Ramsay had his bow drawn and aimed. He barely noticed the arrow coming at him before releasing his own. His jump out of the way and to dodge the arrow, but the men behind him weren't as fast to react. The arrow hit an archer on the front lines and tore through the body into the man behind him, and again it skewered 6 men alone, but it didn't find its mark. Ramsay's arrow, on the other hand, was about to. Jon! Even when the arrow had flown past Jon, he kept his eyes on Rickon. His little brother was running as fast as he possibly could. Almost there. He was so close. He could hear his brother's whimperings of worry and fear. I can make it. He held his arm down from his horse to catch hold of his brother. He was mere seconds away. Rickon reached out to grab Jon's arm before an arrow pierced through his chest and he collapsed to the ground, crying out. Jon stopped his horse and looked down at his brother. The furs Rickon wore were becoming stained with his blood. His breathing was desperate gasps for air that were becoming shorter and shorter. In this moment, Jon could hear Sansa's voice in his head. Don't do what Ramsay wants you to do. He looked at where he was and realized he was in the middle of the field, alone and in range of arrows, but the anger in him clouded his judgment. Rickon was only a child, and now he was dead. He's gonna kill Ramsay if it was the last thing he did. Jon, a voice croaked out. Jon quickly looked down and could see Rickon looking back up at him. His brother was still alive. Jon dismounted and knelt down to him. The arrow barely missed his heart, but the wound had the potential to be fatal. Jon picked up his brother and mounted him on his horse. He climbed on himself and spurred the horse to return to the safety of his army. Rickon groaned and cried, Hold on, little brother. You're gonna be all right. Jon's words were contradicted when the hissing of arrows sounded from above and fell all around. A couple found their way into the hind legs of his horse, and both he and Rickon were thrown off. The arrow in Rickon broke at the shaft, and a loud pop was made when he hit the ground. He screamed out and hardly moved. Jon crawled over to his brother and picked him up into his arms and began to just run as fast as he could. From behind, what one would think to be thunder was actually the Bolton and Karstark cavalry beginning their charge. Jon was still too far to reach his men in time, and carrying his brother slowed him down. He grew angry with every whimper and cry he heard from Rick, every reminder that his brother was getting closer to death. He couldn't be there for Robb when he needed him. He wasn't going to do the same to his baby brother. In response to Ramsay's army, Jon's cavalry had begun their charge to meet them. Spears raised and banners swaying furiously through the air, the ranks parts to avoid Jon, and Rickon and the group of riders slowed and halted for their commander, and with them was a new horse for him. One of the men of House Reed dismounted and took Rickon from Jon. Get him help, as fast as you can. Jon mounted his new destrier and rode off to join his men, as the infantry had nearly caught up with him. Ramsay's cavalry was too far out of range for Jon's archers except for the giant with a bow. Spear-size arrow cut through the air faster than any horse could ride, and with a force greater than any man could throw. They found their marks time and time again, killing more than one man and causing disruption in the charge, which created breaking points to exploit. Jon drew Longclaw and held it up high as he and his men unleashed a war cry. Winter is coming. The two forces met, and the air was filled with the noises of men grunting, spears splintering, steel clashing, and horses screaming. Jon was in the rear when he met the battle, followed behind a line of horses that initially cut through, but were picked off one by one. The battle became scattered, so Jon sought out to find whoever he could to kill. He met another horse rider, but had the faster swing and cleaved his head right off. He found two men about to kill a Hornwood soldier and slashed one across the back and impaled the head of the other. He spurred his horse into a gallop and swung Longclaw at whoever he could. Cries of death sounded as a volley of arrows came down upon everyone. Jon was struck in his back, but his armor caught the arrow between the steel plates within the boiled leather. His horse was spared any injury from the volley as well, but was stuck with a spear in the neck. He fell backward with his horse and quickly rolled to the side to avoid the spear sticking him. He rolled back and told hold of the shaft and thrust Longclaw into the soldier, attacking him. All around him was chaos. Mud was kicked up from the ground all around him, and the shouts of war were loud. There wasn't any moment where Jon wasn't fighting. Another volley, he heard someone call out. Without even thinking, Jon grabbed hold of a Bolton soldier and used him as a shield to the incoming arrows. The man struggled to get free, but ceased when 3 arrows buried themselves into him. Jon knew his army wouldn't fire a volley into this fray. The risk of hitting their own men was too great. Of course, it was Ramsay. He didn't care who died as long as he won. Another volley was incoming, but this time there was no one Jon could use to protect himself. He ducked to the ground and curled his body as the arrows came down, and the bodies continued to pile up around him, and the fights continued atop of them. The moment the last hiss of an arrow ended, he rose back up and immediately swung his sword at whoever would try and kill him. Time seemed to have no meaning as the fury of battle coursed through him. His blood ran hot with fury and focus, and he only realized the moments he attacked and killed someone, everything in between seemed to just flash by. The ground shook as the infantry joined the fight. The giants had started slamming their fists to the ground, crushing any unlucky soldier that was in their path. Magmar the Mighty wielded a tree trunk as a club and swung it down left and right, sending enemies into the air, screaming from pain. One had picked up a man by his legs and used him as a weapon to the point that the body was nothing more than a sack of meat and broken bones. Fonran had taken to picking men from their horses and throwing them under his feet and crushing them. Because of that, and his lack of whale bones for armor, he became the main target by the Bolton forces. In the distance, the archers had abandoned their bows and drawn swords, rushing to join the other men. They wouldn't act as Ramsay did and fire arrows that would kill their own. Jon could hear the shouts of more men approaching the fight from Ramsay's side, that the Umber and Bolton infantry was approaching. Jon looked up to where Ramsay watched the battle. He was surprised when he saw that the majority of Ramsay's cavalry were still with him. Was he saving them in case Jon's army defeated the men he already sent? The Bolton infantry began to surround a great portion of Jon's men and encircled them against a hill of dead bodies. The front line was entirely shields and spears. One and Magmar were trapped with them and were constantly stabbed at by the infantry. Fonran had fallen from being impaled by 20 spears, and the other was still charging with the archers. The wall of Bolton men chanted together as they advanced forward and thrust their spears, killing anyone unprotected. The space around everyone was growing tighter and tighter. The only escape was to climb over the hill of dead bodies. But when the first few men reached the top, the Umbers began to cut them down, and any others trying to escape. They pooled into the circle, forcing Jon's men into a tighter space with nowhere to go. Jon fought many who flooded down from the piles of bodies until he faced Smalljon Umber. This was the man that gave Rickon to Ramsay in the first place. Jon's grip on Longclaw tightened and his inclination to kill rose. But before he could engage with Smalljon, one of the Bolton men dragged Jon down underneath the herd of soldiers running by in an attempt to kill him, but someone had unintentionally stepped onto the soldier's head and crushed it like an apple. The body fell on top of Jon and had pinned him to the ground. The madness around him was too much to even call for help. No one would be able to hear him, and the crushing weight over him was making it nearly impossible to breathe. He suddenly became terrified that he might die being trampled, that he might die in the dark again. In an instant, Jon mustered as much strength as he could and was able to pull himself up. The space between everyone was so little that he was practically lifted from the swarm of soldiers. Everyone trapped within was in a state of panic. The men around him could barely move at all when being attacked from all sides and nowhere to go. Tormund. Magmar forced himself forward and bashed his club against many men. But their numbers were so dense that the force only killed a few and knocked the others down only to get back up. He was impaled by many spears and roared out in rage of the pain. One stole one of the tall shields and used it to swat away spears thrust at him. But these Southerners had better weapons than the crows of the Night's Watch. Their spears held strong and their steel was hard. Tormund shoved his way through men and dead bodies too cramped to fall to the ground. He made for the Hill of the Dead. They needed to climb free, and the only way out was there. His sword wasn't long like the Southerners, making it better for close combat, but this was too close. Whenever a fucking Southerner with a flayed man on his armor got in the way, Tormund cleaved through their flesh with his sword. If the wound wasn't enough to kill, he would just do it again and again until that person was dead. He nearly made it when one big fucker got in his way. The man had long brown hair and a beard that matched Tormund's in length, and he wore a set of chains across his chest like on the banners of the Umbers. He had to be their lord. Tormund roared out as he clashed steel with this man and found his strength to be reckoned with. He found his strikes to be pushed back when he tried to push forward. He landed a hard punch in the lord's face, but it hardly did a thing. As if returning the favor, the lord punched Tormund in the face so hard that it knocked him down. The Umber Lord let go of his sword and pulled Tormund to the ground, only to attack with his fists. The strength of his punches was heavy against Tormund's face. It felt like he had iron in the knuckles of his gloves. Tormund tried to return an attack of any kind, but the shuffling of men around him slowed his movements and was blocked each time. Even the space for the Lord was getting too little, so he resorted to using his head. Things started to become dazed and everything stung. He felt his sword slip through his fingers and pain taking over his strength. He had never felt this way before, not even fighting the dead. This was what a real fight was like with a hardened southern warrior, not a wild man from the true north. The Umberlord kept bashing his head into Tormund's over and over until suddenly he just stopped. There was a horn being blown from far away, and it seemed to get everyone's attention, which created the opening Tormund needed. In an instant, Tormund broke free of the Lord's grip, and instead of using his head like he, the Lord, had, Tormund sank his teeth into the Lord's neck and tore out his flesh. The Lord cried out, and hot blood began to spray out of his wound. Tormund wasn't finished yet. He reached for his belt and pulled out a bone dagger he had and stabbed it deep into the wound. He roared out as he kept stabbing over and over until the southern cunt would stop screaming and just die. All the while, the horn kept blasting and the sound of thundering hooves was growing louder. Jon. In the far distance, Jon heard the sound of a horn blowing. It wasn't one of his, and it wasn't part of the Bolton force. He looked out to a hill and could make out a flag that had the sigil of House Arryn being carried by hundreds of mounted knights. The Knights of the Vale had come to their aid, and their numbers kept growing. Jon heard another horn sound coming from where Ramsay watched. The remaining Bolton and Karstark cavalry forces charged to meet the knights. This was an unplanned move by Ramsay. It had to be. His men were disorganized in their charge and weren't acting on deliberation. In number, they were matched. But in terms of sheer might and skill, the Knights of the Vale had the upper hand. But there was no chance that they would reach the infantry in time. The two cavalry forces met and were clashing steel. The hope Jon had of an opening being made for his men to escape the trap was lost when the Vale forces were delayed by the Bolton cavalry. The Knights of the Vale were far better than the Boltons, but by the time they would break through, Jon and his men would be dead. Jon could see Tormund get the better of Small Jon and stabbing him in the neck many times with a bone dagger. That was the most they would get out of this. Jon was as scared as he had been at Hardhome. He couldn't do anything. All of his skill and experience, and he couldn't do anything to save himself or his men. In the midst of everything, he couldn't help but call out amongst the chaos, "Someone, help us!" As if the gods themselves heard Jon's plea, a loud screech broke through the noise of the battle. It was of a kind never heard by anyone. All who heard it turned to the north, where it came from. For the briefest of moments, there no was fighting. From within the trees in the distance, two creatures sprang up into the air. When they got closer, Jon couldn't help but feel overwhelmed with joy and satisfaction to see Ygritte and Lyaris. They had grown so much, it seemed impossible. Both of them were as large as a horse now. They continued to screech as they approached the battle, causing all that heard them be filled with astonishment and fear. Jon felt a sudden spark within him that was the start of a fire. He could feel a connection with his dragons that he once tried to shut out, but not anymore. They were his dragons, his daughters. As they gliding over to where he was trapped, he shouted up at them with a bellowing voice, "Dracarys!" The instant his daughters heard him, they breathed fire on all of the Bolton infantry surrounding his men. Westeros and Lyaris split up and began to set fire to anyone who resembled the men that were attacking their father. The wall of shields broke apart as many men ran from their positions engulfed in flames. As the screams of men burning alive filled the air, Jon's men were able to push through and create an opening to escape and emptied out of the trap, killing any who got in their way. Jon managed to climb above the hill of dead bodies with Tormund and Wun. Jon looked straight to Ramsay and watched as the bastard cowered from the battle and retreated back to Winterfell with his personal guard. The three of them began to pursue Ramsay, and more of Jon's army began to follow. By the time they reached the castle, the gates had already been barred. Archers in the ramparts began shooting arrows and crossbow bolts at Wun as he slammed his body against the gates. Wygrice and Lyaris flew towards the ramparts and released a short stream of fire that ignited the Bolton archers like they were covered in pitch. 1-1 finally managed to break the gates down and charge into the castle. He was met with dozens of arrows and fell to his knees. He roared out as he kept getting stuck by archers, even after Jon's men stormed through and began cutting all of them down. Jon felt a great rage with every swing of his sword. These men were the last of the ones who betrayed his family. They were the ones that helped kill Robb and thousands of men loyal to his family. He wanted to crush their skulls, tear out their eyes, flay them like the banners they carried. He wanted them to feel the greatest pain ever known. But he wasn't like them. He was a son of House Stark. With the last of the men garrisoned in the castle dead, Jon stood next to 1-1, looking at how exhausted he was. He reached out to him, but before his hand got close, an arrow was shot straight into the giant's eye. 1-1 let out one last breath before falling dead to the ground. Jon looked over and saw Ramsay standing with his bow, looking perfectly calm about his situation. You suggested one-on-one combat. Ramsay looked around at all the archers aiming their arrows at him and smiled. I've reconsidered. I think that sounds like a wonderful idea. Ramsay drew another arrow and knocked it to the string of his recurved bow. Jon tossed aside Longclaw and quickly picked up a Mormont's shield and caught the arrow with it. Ramsay knocked another arrow and shot at Jon again as he advanced. Like the first arrow, it was caught by the shield. Ramsay tried shooting at Jon again, but his arrows never made contact with Jon's flesh. Before Ramsay could knock another arrow, Jon bashed the shield against his body, breaking the arrows against Ramsay's body and knocking him on his back. He dropped the shield and instantly began to punch Ramsay as hard as he could. No matter how many times or how bloody it was, Ramsay kept on smiling at him. Jon kept on punching even when his knuckles stung and his hands felt like sacks of loose meat. After a while, Jon looked up and saw Sansa watching him. Ghost was standing next to her as he had ordered him to guard her before they left for the battle. He looked back at Ramsay and saw he was unconscious. The smile finally faded. He stood up from Ramsay's body, taking one last look at the scum beneath him, and walked away. As he passed Tormund, his words came out last soft as whispers. Put him with his dogs. The battle was over. Winterfell was in the hands of the Starks once again. Jon walked over to Sansa and finally found himself weary from the battle. Are you all right? Sansa asked. Jon merely nodded. His attention turned to the gates, when some men had just come through the gates in a cart. In the back of it was the Maester of Bear Island, tending to Rickon. Jon and Sansa rushed over to their brother. They saw him pale and unmoving. Is he dead? Jon blatantly asked. No, my lord, but if he doesn't receive proper treatment, he will die before nightfall. Jon looked at the Maester and then back to Rickon. There was still a chance for him. Get him inside. Find the Maester of Winterfell. Some Mormont soldiers had arrived shortly and approached Jon, escorting the Maester. He politely bowed his head to Jon. What's your name?
Orta, my lord.
Will you swear loyalty to House Stark now and always?
I will, my lord. I only remain loyal to the Boltons out of fear. Rose was fair to me, but Ramsay was nothing but a mad dog. He fed Lady Walda and her newborn to his hounds. I would be honored to serve under House Stark.
Then go help tend to my brother. If you can see to it that he lives, I'll make sure the rest of your days here are better ones than you've had. Maester Aemon bowed his head and followed to where Rickon was taken. Jon heard the screeches of two whom he had missed for months. Aegris and Lyras swooped down and landed in the courtyard and approached Jon slowly, inspecting him. Many around Jon watched in fascination the two creatures before them. They had changed not only in size, but the color and scales become more prominent. Aegris used to be pure white, but now there were hints of orange in her wings and at the base of the spikes along her spine. Lyra's color had begun to darken significantly, looking more like the color of the sea rather than the sky, but the winter rose blue remained. Jon reached out and caressed their heads with his own. I missed you too. I'm sorry for what I did. I promise I won't do it again. He lifted away and pet them on their heads. Ghost approached them and caught the attention of Eurys. The red eyes of Direwolf stared into the orange eyes of the dragon. Eurys let out a small screech before she and Lyaris flapped their wings and took back to the skies. Tormund looked over at Jon, awed in fascination. They'll be back. They know this is their home. Sansa had watched in marvel at them. You weren't lying about them. I never would. I'll introduce you properly when I can. Jon smiled at her with his face bloodied and filthy. He looked around the castle and felt calm that he was home. But even with the battle won, there was one last thing left to do. Winterfell is ours, he declared. Gather every banner and flag with a flayed man and burn them all. Let's see to it that the direwolves of House Stark fly over the walls once again. He turned to the men who brought Maester Wolkan. Get word to Ser Davos, the dead are to be gathered and counted. Aye, Lord Snow, one of them said before they left to carry out their task. Sansa approached him. What now? Now, we settle back in our home. Sansa. The evening after the battle was a grim one. Though the Stark force achieved victory, almost half of the men gave their lives to retake Winterfell. The wounded were in numbers by the hundreds, and some of them might not make it through the night. Luckily for Sansa and Jon, Rickon was not one of those few, but he was too weak to even leave his bed. Sansa had helped oversee the restoration of the castle to be fit for Starks and not Bolton's. In the dungeons were tools of torture and other devices that Ramsay used for his pleasure. All of them were destroyed, and Jon had spent most of his day organizing the imprisonment of the survivors and surrenderers of the houses that betrayed the North. Many of the Bolton men were executed for their atrocities committed at the Red Wedding. The ones who were not there were spared, but not free to go. With small Jon Umber dead, lordship and command of House Umber would be bestowed upon his 10-year-old son, Ned. Harold Karstark survived the battle and was freezing in a dungeon cell. His fate was yet to be determined. With the hour of twilight gathered, the lands were quiet. The color of the light and the shadows over the land hid the many bodies and a vast amount of blood that was spilled that day. So much death in one day. And if what Jon was saying about the White Walkers and their army was really true, then it was nothing compared to what was to come. Sansa stood on the battlements of Winterfell, looking out to the lands beyond. The smell of battle still lingered, and many were still radiating the desire to kill. She didn't enjoy brooding as much as Jon looked like he did, but she found it peaceful. Her privacy was ended when Littlefinger found her, as he always managed to. The ravens have been sent, winter has come for Bolton, the summons has been made, and northern lords should be arriving in a matter of days. To renew their oaths to your house. He spoke like he knew something she didn't. Those vows wouldn't need to be renewed if they had joined your cause. Instead, they turned you away until a victor was decided. The Boltons created a powerful hold over them through fear and strength of numbers. After tonight, their house will be nothing but a memory. The men of the North have a loyalty than almost anyone south of the Neck. Maybe when your father was their warden, he was loved and respected. When Robb was king in the North, he betrayed their loyalty for a woman. We all know what became of that choice. If they are to serve under you, you mustn't give them any chance to doubt your will or the strength of your family name. I do not doubt their loyalty, only their bravery. The only houses that will pay for their treachery are the ones that fought for Ramsay. Perhaps, for now, they need to see that the North is truly back in the hands of House Stark, and banners of direwolves over the walls won't be enough when they arrive. Sansa gave a smirk of her own before leaving him in silence. She never liked how he always had the last words, but she would let him have them for the night, because by the time the sun rose tomorrow, the entire North would know what happens to those that would betray and harm her family. Firstly, she went to go see Jon. He took to the Godswood, the only place not desecrated by House Bolton with their presence. She shivered lightly to be back here, though, remembering her wedding and the night that followed. It filled her with hate and disgust. But her feelings were replaced with serenity and calmness when she saw Jon sitting at Hearttree with his dragons. His Valyrian sword was leaning up against the weirwood, clean of the blood that stained the blade from the battle and resting in its scabbard. The two dragons turned their attention to her when they noticed her approaching. They didn't approach her, however. Jon looked her way and was glad to see her. I promised to introduce you, didn't I? Sansa hesitated to get any closer than she already was. The dragons were still beasts, after all. It's all right, they won't bite at you. Are you sure? Aye. He scratched underneath the chin of the white one and saw it act almost human. This is Ygritte. The blue one is named Lyaras. Go on, you can touch them. The blue one, Lyaras, crawled forward to Sansa like it was inspecting her. It stretched out its head to her, waiting for her reaction. Slowly, Sansa reached her hand out and touched the scales of the dragon. She immediately felt the warmth from the touch and was astonished. She was touching a living, breathing dragon, a creature that had been reduced to nothing but bones and words on pages of books. Until now, these were 2 of 5 that existed in the world, as far as anyone would know. She moved her hand down the neck of Laeris, and it reminded her of Lady. It was relaxing to do. They're both very beautiful and dangerous. She saw how much death they alone caused at the battle. They would become very powerful given enough time to grow. With them, no one would think to question authority at the risk of being burned. But something that kept puzzling Sansa was why Jon, only those of Valyrian blood, could tame dragons, and as far as she knew, House Stark was free of any such blood. But unlike her, he was a bastard. Whoever his mother was, that might be the reason as to why. The last of the evening light had faded from the sky, and the stars became more prominent, but they were about to be swallowed by clouds that would bring snow. As much as Sansa wanted to spend more time with the dragons, she had to see to the extermination of House Bolton. I'll see you on the morrow. Sansa, Jon stopped her. Are you sure you want to do this alone? More than anything. Jon gave the same comforting smile that their father would give them as children. She took her leave of her brother and made for the kennels where Ramsay had spent the entire day bloody and unconscious. She made all the preparations for proper justice to be given for all the pain and misery he caused. Sansa stood by the gates, waiting as Ramsay stirred awake. Ah, Sansa! Ramsay's lips curved into a smile as they always would. Hello, Sansa. She didn't reply, she only met his gaze and didn't break it, staring at him as cold and as full of contained rage. Is this where I'll be staying now? Again, she said nothing, but that was enough to give Ramsay his answer. No, our time together is about to come to an end. That's all right. You can't kill me. I'm a part of you now. Sansa spoke up. Your words will disappear. Your house will disappear. Your name will disappear. All memory of you will disappear. Ramsay chuckled again before giving his answer to what Sansa said. Sansa, you should know by now that the scars of pain never disappear. Will I be burned by your bastard brother's dragons? Will that give you the pleasure that I gave? A dragon is too great to put down a mad dog. Something began growling from the kennels around Ramsay. He looked over at his dogs, who began to approach him. My hounds will never harm me, he said with confidence. You haven't fed them in 7 days, you said it yourself, she replied. They're loyal beasts. Now they're starving. One of them got right in front of Ramsay and began to sniff at him. Even Sansa could smell the stench of his blood. Sit, Ramsay hissed. The dog ignored Ramsay's command and slightly licked his face to taste the blood. Down. The hounds continued to ignore him, and finally, the one in front of Ramsay sank its teeth into his jaw and tore it off. The dogs all followed, barked, howled as they joined in the tearing apart of their master. Sansa moved to turn away, but she wanted to watch more. Ramsay's screams were oddly satisfying and were louder than the barks of his hounds as they all began to rip him to pieces. Blood poured from every wound of Ramsay's body, and he became bathed in the red. His screams became muddled gurgles, but he wasn't dead yet. He wouldn't be dead until there was nothing left of him but bone and blood. Finally, after seeing enough, Sansa took her leave of the kennels to get her rest for the night. All the while she walked, she couldn't resist a smile of satisfaction. The dismissal of the Red Priestess was something that was troubling to many. Some of the wildlings thought it bad, too, and it would anger her god that raised Jon back to life. Others thought it good because her magic was evil, and it was what leads Stannis Baratheon to his demise. Nearly an hour later, hundreds of large funeral pyres that were built through the night were completed, and the dead were resting on them. There were some that wanted the bones of their fallen returned home, while others thought that a funeral at Winterfell would be an honor for the dead. Jon stood atop the walls of Winterfell, looking out to the field of the battle, and Sansa stood near him. The remainder of the army stood outside of the castle, listening to him speak a eulogy to honor those who died for the cause. These men were men of the North. They came from every corner of their lands. They fought to rid the North of men who betrayed them and their kingdom. They shall be remembered not as soldiers who fought against the Boltons, but as heroes who freed the North from their grasp. and now we lay them to rest with their forefathers." Tormund stood next to Jon holding a bow in his hands and gave it to him. Jon lit an arrow as he knocked it and aimed it at the pyre that one and the Fonran rested upon. He released it, and everyone watched it sail through the air. The arrow found its mark and ignited the pyre in a great blaze. As the flame spread, many other archers fired flaming arrows into the air towards the dead. The field of the battle was now a field of fire. The heat so great, everyone could feel it from where they stood. Above them all, circling around the rising tower of smoke, were the dragons. They were calling out as the fires burned. The sounds they made were like a song almost. The next order of business was the trial of Harald Karstark in the Great Hall with the other lords of the North, and who supported the Starks and the clan leaders of the wildlings that survived. Jon and Sansa took their seats at the high table. Harald was brought from the dungeons in chains. The white sun that decorated his shirt was still stained with blood. Sansa stood up from his seat and addressed the accused. "Harald of House Karstark, you stand accused of treason against your king Robb of House Stark and your liege lord Rickon of House Stark. You withdrew your banners from the war after swearing an oath of fealty to answer when called upon. You supported Roose Bolton and his bastard son Ramsay in their claim as Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North. How do you answer these charges?" Harald spat a gob of phlegm to the ground in front of her, and Jon, "I am not guilty of any crimes. I swore no such fealty to your brother after he murdered my father." "Your father was not murdered. He was executed justly for betraying the orders of his king. He killed the Lannister boys who were innocent of the deaths of your brothers. By not swearing fealty to your king, you were in open rebellion against him. You stood by as Ramsay Bolton flayed innocent people alive. You plotted the death of Rickon Stark with Ramsay Bolton and Small John Umber. Do you deny these?" Harald scoffed at her and looked at Jon. "I will not let my head fall from the block by your blade, bastard. I demand trial by combat. I will die a warrior." He faced death with determination, at least. "My lord," Maester Wolkin said to Jon from behind him. He turned his head to look at the Maester. "I'm not a lord, Maester. Forgive me, but a week before the battle had begun, I received a raven from the Citadel informing me that King Tormund Baratheon has forbidden trial by combat throughout the Seven Kingdoms. By law, the North is bound to this as well." Jon looked back at Harald. "Despite your attempt to show a bit of valor, you will not be granted your demand, but neither will you be losing your life today." The lords around Jon looked at him, confused. "There are 47 surviving Bolton soldiers, and you'll be joining them to the wall where you will all take the black. Your daughter Alice will be named Lady of Carhold, and the surviving soldiers of your army will be sent home. My brother made a mistake executing your father, I admit that, but justice was demanded, and Robb gave it. I share blood with you, Harald, and I won't become a kinslayer. But more importantly, we live in a time when we need every person who still breathes to fight in the war that's coming from beyond the wall." Harald snickered at Jon. "And who are you to sentence me, bastard? You even said it just now, you're not a lord. And who are you to be granted such mercy?" Sansa demanded, "You've committed enough treason to have your head mounted on a spike. Your death would only be remembered as a traitor's death. This is our only mercy to you. You will take the black and pray that your service will be enough to redeem you of your crimes." Sansa thought Jon was being unjust in his choice, but he was right. They needed as many soldiers as they could get. Harald was speechless. He looked around at the other lords as if expecting someone to object for him, but all remained silent. He was escorted out of the Great Hall by Hornwood soldiers as Sansa and Jon sat back down. Don Mizine, the lord of House Mizine, broke the silence that surrounded the lords and ladies in the Great Hall. "What did you mean when you said the war that's coming from beyond the wall?" Jon looked over to Lord Mazine. "I think it'd be better to say when the other lords join us, my lord. But know this, everything I will tell you is as real as the dragons that fly above this castle as we speak." That raises another question. Lady Mormont spoke. "Why are there dragons in the north?" There was utter silence in the hall as all eyes fell on Jon. "They were a gift left behind by a friend when he died. They chose me as their father. A son of Stark blood with dragons," Lord Mazin announced. "What are we to make such things?" I suppose we'll find out soon enough, Jon said. Sansa dismissed the lords and ladies before they themselves left the Great Hall and went to see Rickon in his bed. They entered his room and saw him lying in his bed, asleep. His upper body was bandaged and his skin was covered in sweat. His breaths were long and steady, a sign of good recovery. This was the first Sansa really looked at her baby brother since she left Winterfell with Arya and her father. He had grown so much in the years since they'd seen him. His hair was longer and developed curls. His body grew much taller than any normal boy of 10 and 1 years. He'll be as tall as Ser Duncan the Tall one day, Sansa thought, smiling and relieved to see Rickon. Maester Aemon approached Rickon's side and folded a wet cloth onto Rickon's forehead. The arrow that pierced him grazed his collarbone, but I'm afraid it snapped when he fell off your horse. We managed to fix the bone and stop his bleeding, but he will be in much pain. He can't leave his bed for at least a fortnight. How long until he's fully healed? Jon asked. It will take months, I'm afraid. But he will be able to move better after about 3 weeks' time. Sansa sat in a chair next to her little brother. How long until he wakes? He should wake by tomorrow. Sansa grabbed Rickon's hand and gently squeezed it, making small circles with her thumb. His skin was burning, but he had to keep fighting. They finally had their home back. It would be too cruel for him to die now. She stood back up and left the room, Jon following behind her. The two of them found their way to the top of the Winterfell's walls, looking out to the north. Eurys and Leiras were flying together a long way off in the distance. Jon seemed to be mesmerized by them. It was like watching a dance. All of a sudden he began to sing quietly. Though the winds of winter blow, they will never scare the crow. For when the king comes striking down, our steel will break his crown, and then the skies will fill with light. Our brothers have won the fight, and then the one who is lost shall win. And the greatest of ages shall begin. The wolves will howl, and the dragons cry. Through fire and ice, we will never die. Sansa became impressed with her brother. She'd never heard Jon sing, had a nice voice for it. Beautiful song. Where did you hear it? Jon smiled at her. I learned it from the dragons in a dream. Rickon. Jon and Sansa had visited Rickon as often as they could in the days after he had woken up. Ghost was his most frequent and favorite visitor, though. The white direwolf would lay at the foot of his bed every night and keep him company in the afternoons. Although he wasn't as playful as Shaggy Dog or Summer, he always looked sad and was so quiet. It felt nice to have a bed again. Although the mattress felt too soft after years of sleeping in the grass outside or months in a dungeon cell, and the blankets he had were nice and warm. Far better than what he was forced to use in his cell. Through his window, Rickon could even sometimes see the dragons flying by and he could hear their screeches. He couldn't believe it when Jon told him that they were his and how they saved his army from the Boltons. He wanted to see them badly, but until he could breathe without feeling pain, he wouldn't be going anywhere for a while. Luckily, he was used to being confined. Can't you bring the dragons in the castle? They can't be that big. Rickon pleaded. His voice had to be soft, or else he would feel pain. They're nearly a year old, Jon informed, and they're as big as horses. They wouldn't fit through the door. Ghost's as big as a horse, and he fits just fine. Ghost doesn't have wings, and I don't want the castle burning down again. Rickon tried not to laugh at that. Laughing hurt greatly. Maybe I could go outside to see them. Rickon, you need to stay in bed. I don't want to. Oh! Raising his voice made the pain shoot through his body as if the arrow hit him all over again. He wanted to grab at the source so much, he even tried to, but Jon held his arm back. He knew that any kind of pressure might make the wound worse. Maester Aemon rushed into the room. His was asked to stay close by in case such pains occurred. Give him milk of the poppy, Jon ordered. At once, my lord. Maester Aemon started going through his things left on a desk in the room. He mixed the medicine with water and poured it slowly into Rickon's mouth. The pain started to die down, but it still pulsed. Maester, could you give us a moment? Jon asked.
Yes, my lord.
Maester Aemon excused himself after he tidied up his things. Jon helped reposition Rickon and adjusted his pillows and furs to provide better comfort. It's not being in bed that bothers you, is it? I don't want to stay in a cell anymore. Rickon felt cold when the memories of the dungeons flooded him. When it got cold, Ramsay gave me a blanket. It was made from Osha's skin after he flayed her. I prayed to the gods to let me out. I bargained my life for one day, and I got it. But now I'm back here. I'm not home, Jon. I'm trapped again. I want to be home. He suddenly felt tired. Sleep weighed down on his eyelids, but he refused to let it take him. It's still too early for you to get out of bed. I'm sorry, but I promise that the minute you are ready, the first thing we'll do is see the dragons. I promise. Jon's words faded into the back of Rickon's mind as sleep took over. Finally, it was dreamless. Luckily for Rickon, for the past few months, all he dreamt about was death. The death of Robb, his mother, Shaggy Dog, his father, Osha, everyone that had a place in his heart. Ever since father left home, the world Rickon knew was falling apart. He ended up sleeping through the entire night until the afternoon of the next day. Today, though, neither Sansa, Jon, nor Ghost came to see him. The only one who kept to his regular visits was Maester Aemon. He was assisted by a maid as they were changing Rickon's sweaty bandages. They were both nice people, but unfamiliar to Rickon. He had to wait for them to finish cleaning him before they wrapped him back up and put a clean shirt on him before he could speak. "Where's Sansa and Jon?" he spoke slowly, not wanting to feel any pain in his efforts. Maester Aemon disposed of the old bandages into a large sack before answering. "The rest of the northern lords and ladies arrived in the morning and are now meeting with your sister and half-brother. But if I'm being honest, I don't think it will end very pleasantly. My lord, the maid assisting him departed with the sack and left Rickon alone with the maester." "How come?" "I did not grow up in the north, but I know very well the stubbornness northerners have towards the wildlings. The hatred towards them bleeds down to the southern kingdoms as well. But they fought for us. Without them, Jon wouldn't have won back Winterfell. And from what Rickon was told, not all the lords who were present had any part in the battle at all. They hid away in their castles. I don't think they'll take that to heart when he defends them. The only one they'll really listen to is your sister, since she's the acting lady of Winterfell, until you recover. And I mean no disrespect, of course, but your half-brother is a Snow, not a Stark." Rickon didn't know much of politics or diplomacy. When Bran was Lord of Winterfell, he only attended a few of his meetings out of boredom, but he never understood very well what was going on. They were all about demands and sacrifices made to meet those demands, but in every meeting, the people always listened to Bran because he was their lord and they were sworn to obey him. He sighed out, disappointed that he was still stuck in his room. "Do you know any way to speed up the healing? I want to get out of here. I'm afraid no Maester in all the Seven Kingdoms is that skilled. If you had a wizard, then, perhaps, all you can do is rest and wait. That's the hard truth." Rickon wanted to punch his fist on his pillow, but that kind of movement would put him in great pain. "However, after meeting with your half-brother after you fell asleep, we came up with a solution together, and it was finished not an hour ago." He went out to the hallway momentarily and came back with a chair that had wheels so it could move. Rickon's eyes widened, and he couldn't resist a smile. "Jon had this made for me. It was built through the night. The people here are doing what they can to give their gratitude for liberation from the Boltons. If we use some furs to pad it, you should be able to sit on it with much pain. Get me dressed. I want to try it now." The maid had returned to assist Maester Aemon once more. While he outfitted the chair to be comfortable, the maid undressed Rickon out of his sweaty night clothes and into some clean breeches and a shirt. Together, Maester Aemon and the maid carefully lifted Rickon from the bed to the chair and gently sat him down. The pain was present and the seat was warm. The maid put on his boots and wrapped a smaller fur blanket over his body. "How do you feel?" Aemon asked. "Excellent, really excellent," Rickon happily replied. "I imagine you want some fresh air." Rickon did want to go outside, but not while the Northern Lords were in a meeting. Thinking on it, it felt like Jon was cornered by them. He was doing all the work while they just are mean about how he does it. They wouldn't listen to them because he's a bastard. But they would have to listen to the rightful Lord of Winterfell. "I want to go to the Great Hall." "My lord, the men are still meeting." "I know. And as a rightful Lord of Winterfell, I have a place among them. I'm a year older than Lyanna Mormont, and Jon said that she's the type of girl no one would be in the way of. I think I should be there too." Maester Aemon opened his mouth to object, but he obliged. He grabbed the handles of the chair and wheeled Rickon out of the room. The ride was a little bumpy, but it wasn't so bad that it hurt. It felt so good just to get out of the room. As Rickon and Maester Aemon got nearer to the Great Hall, he could hear voices he did not recognize echoing from the chamber. You can't expect the Knights of the Vale to side with wildling invaders. The accent of the man who spoke wasn't northern. He was probably one of the men from the Vale. We didn't invade. We were invited. Whoever said that had to be a wildling. The accent was northern, and the response was clear as to who he represented. Not by me. Rickon could hear Jon speaking over the other lords before someone else spoke. This time it was a northerner. The Boltons are defeated. The war is over. Winter has come. If the Maesters are right, it'll be the coldest one in 1,000 years. We should ride home and wait out the coming storms. Jon's voice became loud again. The war is not over. And I promise you, friend, the true enemy will not wait out the storm. He brings the storm. Rickon had entered the room after Jon finished that sentence, and all eyes fell upon it. Jon and Sansa sat at the high table, and Ghost laid down in front of it. Glad to see you could get out of bed, Jon announced. We'll be done soon, and then I'll join you. Rickon shook his head. I wanted to know what's happening, and I wanted to hear what the Lords of the North were talking about. Jon's brow perked up. You do? Rickon nodded. Jon had half a smirk when he pulled the chair next to him away from the high table to clear space. I would not refuse you. Rickon was wheeled to his spot, provided, and all eyes fell upon him. It's good to see you are recovering, my Lord Stark, one of the older men said. Many banged on their tables to agree with that statement. Rickon was going to thank him for his words, but he came to a realization just then that almost overwhelmed him. I am the Lord of Winterfell, aren't I? And Warden of the North? Aye, you are by right, Jon told him. Rickon remembered the last time he saw Bran, the time they spoke. If anything happens to me, you're the heir to Winterfell. As far as anyone knew, Bran could be dead north of the wall. Maybe he wasn't, but he was gone and Rickon was here, and he was no longer an heir. Then as my first act as Lord, tomorrow I'm giving up my titles to someone who knows what to do them. There was half an uproar in the Great Hall. This was surprising to say the least. My lords, Rickon half called. I have no idea how to be a lord, not even a warden. You deserve someone who knows how to lead. He looked up to Jon. I'm a bastard, Rickon. He told him, I can't inherit those titles. I can understand your position, so if you're stepping down, then you should give them to your heir. He turned his head to Sansa, and all eyes fell upon her. Will you do it, Sansa? Rickon asked. Until you're ready to be. Then starting tomorrow, you are the Lady of Winterfell, and Wardeness of the North. Many of the lords cheered and banged their tables for such a move, but Rickon wasn't done. But until tomorrow, there are some things I'd like to do. What do you mean? Jon asked. You're a bastard! But that doesn't mean you can't still be a lord. From this day on, I name my brother Jon Snow as Lord of the Dreadfort and the lands it holds. Half the Northmen cheered while the other half whispered among themselves. One of the whispering lords stood up from his seat. Are you sure that to be a wise decision, my lord? I don't know your name, Lord. Robert Glover. Lord Glover, your sigil is a silver gauntlet on a red field. Am I wrong? You have it right. Rickon gave half a smile. I remember half the sigils of the North. The Merman of House Manderly, the Axe of House Serwyn. But when I was running from being shot full of arrows, I only saw less than half of what I remembered. His smile died, and so did any noise in the room. Why didn't you come to fight? I spent months in a cell and overheard all the horrible things the Boltons had done. They flayed innocent people. They raped women and young girls. Why wouldn't you fight against the house that allowed such things? The very house that slaughtered our families and friends at the Red Wedding. A wave of shame fell over the lords that did not fight. I saw my bastard brother at the head of his army, leading loyal men and wildlings. If he can unite people who have warred against each other for thousands of years and lead them into battle, then I can think of no better man to lead us. He's the type of Stark I want to be. Many of the lords cheered and banged their tables again, loudly, but there were still some who were unsure. A small girl, barely younger than Rickon, stood up and spoke with a fierce voice. Your son was butchered at the Red Wedding, Lord Manderly. She was looking directly at a very large lord with white hair and a gorget with a merman on it, but you refused the call. She turned to face Rebecca Glover. You swore allegiance to House Stark, Lord Glover, but in their hour of greatest need, you refused the call. And you, Lord Serwyn, her gaze fell upon one of the younger men among the lords. Your father was skinned alive by Ramsay Bolton. Still, you refused the call. Lord Serwyn's eyes fell to the floor, ashamed to look at the young lady. But House Mormon remembers. The North remembers. We know no king, but the king in the North, whose name is Stark. She looked directly at Jon after she said that. Lord Rickon is right, and I don't care if Lord Snow's a bastard. Ned Stark's blood runs through his veins. He's my king, from this day until his last day. Rickon could tell that Jon was speechless. Anyone in his position would be, as the Lady of House Mormont sat down. Lord Manderly stood up. Lord Stark and Lady Mormont speak harshly. And truly, my son died for Robb Stark, the young wolf. I didn't think we'd find another king in my lifetime. He turned to face the Starks. I didn't commit my men to your cause because I didn't want more Manderlys dying for nothing. But I was wrong. Jon Snow avenged the Red Wedding. He united the wildlings, the Northmen, and even dragons, as no man who lived could. He is the White Wolf. The Lord drew his sword and raised it high above him, the king in the North. He fell to one knee as many cheered in unison. Lord Mazeen stood up from his seat. I speak for all when I say I never thought to see dragons live again. To see them follow you as their leader is a sign of the gods. Any man who can do such things is more than that. He is a dragon himself. The Winter Dragon, the king in the North. He drew his sword and knelt down as well. Lord Glover stood up next to the kneeling Lord Manderly. I did not fight beside you on the field, and I will regret that to my dying day. A man can only admit when he was wrong and ask for forgiveness. Rickon looked over at Jon, who barely managed to bring his words above a whisper. There's nothing to forgive, my lord. Lord Glover turned his head to make sure all could hear his words. There will be more fights to come, and House Glover will stand behind House Stark, as it has for 1,000 years, and I will stand behind Jon Snow. He too drew his sword and raised it high, the king in the North. Someone called out to them amongst the rest of the lords. The king in the North. Every lord stood up and drew their swords, cheering. The king in the North. The king in the North. Rickon couldn't hold back his smile as he looked at Jon when he stood up. He couldn't shout with the other lords, but he could still say the words, the king in the North. Ed! Jon had written to Ed a few days ago. He told of the victory and the return of his dragons. Ed was glad to read that he wrote his dragons, and not the dragons. But what was more surprising is that the message was signed as Jon Snow, the king in the North. Ed rolled his eyes. Reading that, of course Jon would become a king. He couldn't stop with being brought back from the dead or having dragons. Being Lord Commander looked easier than it actually was. At least for Ed, it was. Aside from the tasks Jon had to do, he now had to take charge of over 2,000 men who came from Essos. For the first time in centuries, Castle Black was crowded with too many people, as were the other two castles. There were men from Essos of all colors and sizes. One would have thought that they would look Dornish, but even they were too different. The three castles weren't large enough to house all of them, so Ed had to recommission several others. The Torches, Green Guard, and Stone Door were once again manned with the men of the Night's Watch, but the castles were like rotting fruit, wasting away over the years. It took months to get them operable, but it would be years before they would be restored. And from what Ed witnessed at Hardhome, it wouldn't be a surprise to him if the horn blasted 3 times in the next hour. He couldn't garrison men at the Night Fort yet. There wasn't enough. 1,000 men alone were needed to keep it maintained. But there were still many who, from across the narrow sea, their numbers grew now that the fleet of 3 ships expanded to 7. Some free men from Slaver's Bay, or the Bay of Dragons as it was now named, stole some ships from former masters and came here. All it took was some black paint and removing the unnecessary wealth of the ships to make them the watches. Ed didn't care for whose property they were. They needed ships. If they lived through this, he would have them returned. Ed had arranged for 60 brothers to begin the reconstruction of Greygar. The damn place was meant to be rebuilt a year ago, but after Sleen's punishment, things got busy with Stannis Baratheon and the dragons. But now that the Starks ruled once again, everyone could breathe easy and not worry about armies coming from the south. The wall has never been as strong as this. For at least 1,000 years, had Grenn not gone to Essos then, things would have never been this way. Castle Black would be rotting just like the other unmanned castles with less men than Eastwatch and the Shadow Tower. In fact, if they lasted through the next few years, there might not have been enough to garrison even 3 castles. There was also the issue of wildlings being allowed past the wall. They weren't all at Hardhome when the dead attacked, thankfully, and they were coming in groups ranging from a few to a few dozen at a time. Word had spread about the massacre and also about what Jon did for those that survived it. Jon said to let them all pass, but twice already some of the small groups tried to attack the Night's Watch, and they had been forced to kill them, but it never happened with the giants or their mammoths. They seemed to keep to themselves and ignore the men as if they didn't care for fighting them, and no one dared to raise any weapons against them. Ed was currently with his new officers, sitting at the high table in the Commons, discussing the fortification of the Reimgate and possibly Sable Hall when enough men were available, and it wouldn't be long until there were. The first builder, Sir Andrew Lorch, was explaining that they did not have the time nor the resources to do both. He was a rather large man, but not as much as Sam. He had been a brother for nearly 40 years, since he was 12. We have the lumber and the steel, but we don't have the food to feed the men. The game in those parts is scarce, and even with the supplies that come from the Essos ships, we won't have enough. I can only restore one of the castles. The first ranger, a man of 22 named Jack Ironsmith, voiced his opinion. He was one of those men girls were probably crying over for choosing a sworn life of celibacy. The wall above Reimgate has been untouched for 200 years. It's the only section that can't be patrolled, and the stairwells haven't been fixed for an even longer time. But if we do, we'll have access to another gate beyond the wall, and the ballistas on top. And if memory serves me right, they were a gift from one of the Targaryen kings. The design is far advanced than what we have, and can fire 6 bolts in 10 seconds. But the Sable Hall, on the other hand, if we have a garrison there, we can start sending men to train for mounted combat. And the way some of these foreigners fight on horses is incredible. We could learn a thing or 20 from them. He had only just recently joined the Night Watch not more than 3 moons ago, and he was as nearly as good a fighter as Jon. The first steward, Michael Stonehouse, didn't say anything. Ed assumed he was still preoccupied with adjusting to his new position. He had just been appointed the first steward after the one before him died in an accident with the wildlings, while at Eastwatch working through a problem with Cotter Pike. What about this one, right here? Ed pointed at the castle east of Reimgate. The Long Barrow is closer to Eastwatch, and that's where the dead are likely to attack. It can house more than 1,000 men, but only needs about 100 to operate. We'll need our fighting strength as close as we can get it. Long Barrow's been claimed by the wildlings, Michael informed. In fact, some of the men call it Whore's Barrow because it's a tribe of women. But believe me, they're not turning a place into a brothel, that's for sure. Don't bother them, and they won't bother you. They can't have it. The agreement was they can back south of the wall, not take over the castle. The Watch couldn't use until now. We should send word to the former Lord Commander, Andrew suggested. Maybe he can intimidate them with his dragons. I keep hearing whispers that he's some kind of god to them. Ed scoffed at that nonsense. Jon was just a lucky bastard who had friends looking out for him. Enough of that. Michael, send a raven to Winterfell and to the Long Barrow. We'll see if we can come to an understanding before we draw swords. For now, we'll reconstruct Sable Hall. Jack's right, we're unprepared, and compared to real soldiers, we're all still green boys. We need to raise our strength so we can hit hard when the dead arrive. Ballistas would only be effective if there were giants coming. We'd be wasting shots on targets so small.
By your orders, Lord Commander, Jack said. However, I will only be able to spare about 15 rangers.
The Master-at-Arms and I still have our hands full training the new recruits. Most of the ones from Essos look like they can barely lift a sword, let alone wield one. But the few who can, their style of swordplay is vicious. Especially the horse riders. I forgot what they're called. Dothruggers? Dothruggers? The Dothraki? Michael corrected. We're lucky to have as many of them as we do. Hardly any of them have any braids. The other officers looked at each other, confused as to what First Steward Stonehouse had said to them. The Dothraki braid their hair for every victory they achieve, But if they should lose at some point, they cut their braids off as an act of shame. Michael Stonehouse wasn't near the size of Sam, but he was just as knowledgeable in the things no one else would be. I don't care if they have enough braided hair to scale up the wall, Ed snapped. I care if they will be able to face the army of 100,000 dead men that's coming. All of you gather the men the castle will need. Jack, I want you to assign the commander before you ride for the Long Barrow. The first officers all bowed their heads and left Ed to himself. Ed laid back into his chair and let out a long, heavy sigh. He needed some time to rest. Unfortunately, he would not be blessed with such a luxury when he heard the horn atop the wall blast twice. More wildlings. Ed got up from the table and gathered 8 other brothers of the Watch to accompany him. With the violence that had broken out, he had to be cautious when letting the wildlings through the wall. He wished he had a wildling with him to help keep the peace. They each gathered torches and lit them before they entered the tunnel and walked to the gates. 6 of the brothers had drawn their swords when the light from the true north cracked through the darkness. By the time the gate was up, Ed looked upon only 2 people waiting for them, a boy and a girl. The boy was lying down on a crudely made sled, which probably meant he was a cripple. The girl carried a rusted sword at her side. They were dressed in furs, but they didn't look like wildlings at all. They weren't as gruff or hardened as all the others, but Ed had to ask anyway. You wildlings? The girl gave their answer. I'm Mira Reed, daughter of Howland Reed. That was a surprise, to say the least. The Reeds were one of the House of Cranagan in the Neck. What was a highborn girl doing beyond the wall? But Ed felt he remembered the name from someone telling him about it. It was from Sam, he remembered. After coming from the night fort with Gilly, they ran into a group of people with a direwolf-like ghost, and one of them was a cripple. She gestured to the boy on the sled. This is Brandon Stark, son of Ned Stark. Ed nearly lost his breath and took a quick look at the boy's face, trying to see any resemblance to Jon, but couldn't find any besides the color of his hair. His eyes were brown, but not as dark as Jon's. Regardless, he felt a bit cautious. How do I know that's true? The boy looked at Ed. Something about his gaze wasn't human. It felt colder than the winds and snow passing by. You were at the Fist of the First Men. You were at Hardhome. You've seen the army of the dead. You've seen the Night King. He's coming for us, for all of us. That didn't answer his question, but it was enough to remind him that it didn't matter. These 2 didn't pose a threat to be worried about, but more than that, Ed was wondering how in 7 hells this boy knew what he just said. Come on, let's get them inside. 2 of the brothers sheathed their swords and grabbed the ropes to Brandon's sled and pulled him through. Ed took one last look at beyond the wall before going back inside, looking out for the storm that covered the dead. He turned around and returned inside the tunnel, the gate closing right behind him. Ed brought him to the common room for some food. They looked like they haven't eaten anything in days. 2 bowls of hot soup were given to them, and Mira immediately began to scarf it down. Brandon, on the other hand, acted the opposite. He ate his soup slowly. I'm the acting Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, Edison Tollett. There's an escort of men from the battle at Winterfell, arriving in a few days. You can leave with them when they return to Winterfell after dropping off their prisoners of war. Mira had just finished her soup and set her bowl aside. Thank you, Lord Commander. Brandon lifted his head up from his bowl. One of the men with them would suit your needs for the Sable Hall. All eyes except for Mira Reed's turned to Bran. No one muttered a sound. How'd you know about that? His name is Harold Karstark, former Lord of Karhold. Brandon went back to eating his soup silently. Ed expected himself to be estranged by this, but after all, he's seen this was just another item on a list of mysterious and impossible things, proving otherwise. You were let beyond the wall by Samwell Tarly, weren't you? Mira reached her hand to her belt and pulled out a dragonglass dagger. He gave us what he could before we parted ways with him and his woman. Do you want to know what's happened since then? I'm sure you have a lot of questions. I know that Robb died, Bran said. He died at the Twins, along with my mother, and lost the war. I know what happened to Jon and why he was released from his vows. I know about his dragons. Ed looked at him, amazed and confused. Brandon spoke of such things that someone like him would be amazed at so emptily.
Why did you go beyond the wall?
Ed couldn't help but ask. Anyone would ask that to a cripple who survived the True North longer than some experienced rangers could. There was someone I had to meet. Someone who had to teach me something very important for Jon and someone else. The Night King killed him after we escaped. Ed was mystified. The more Bran said, the less he understood. How do you know these things? Bran was beginning to scare him. He had kept the same face he had when the gates had opened. He didn't seem to be hiding his emotions. It was as if he had none to begin with. It's complicated. Believe me when I tell you that. The less you know, the better you might understand. Bran finished the last of his soup and set his bowl aside. If you wouldn't mind, I would like to go the weirwood tree beyond the wall sometime tomorrow. I've forbidden any ranging parties to go beyond the wall. We can't afford to lose even a single man. If he could afford it, he would take a force to lay siege to the wildling women at the Long Barrow. The dead won't attack yet. They're not even marching south. Ed looked puzzled, as did Mira and the others with them. How do you know that? I've been keeping watch over them with ravens. You know what a warg is? Aye, I do. The Night King is adding as much as he can to his army. Not just men, he also has giants, snow bears, dire wolves, and many other beasts. He won't be marching south for quite a while. Ed just remained silent. This was good news from a certain angle. It meant that his men had more time than they thought they did. Do you know where he'll attack? The bulk of the army is still massing near Hardhome, but they're moving slowly. I'm not sure if they're going to the part of the wall that's closest, or where they can slip through unchallenged. I need more time observing them. Even so, I can't let you pass. If you want to pray to the old gods, you'll have to wait till you get to Winterfell. I'm not gonna pray. I'm going so that I can see. Ed still had no idea what he meant. If the Stark boy wanted to look out to the north, he should go to the top of the wall. See what? Everything, everywhere, at every moment. Jon. Becoming a lord was a surprise. Becoming a king was overwhelming. Jon wasn't looking to be one, and neither did he really want it. But if he truly was going to lead his people and the free folk against the dead, then he had to do what's best for his people, and if being the king in the north was the answer, then so be it. He didn't want a crown made for himself. He didn't think it really mattered and didn't care for one. The only thing he did have made was a gorget with 2 of the direwolf sigil facing inwards on the front. To him, that was his crown. At the Lord's table, Jon stood in the center with Sansa at his right. Even though Rickon had the means to be out of his room now, he needed to resume his studies as much as he could. He barely even started them before everything went to 7 hells for their family. Sansa had instructed Maester Aemon to spend many hours teaching Rickon to read. Once he could grasp the basics properly, he would begin to practice writing. Jon noticed that Ghost had practically abandoned him for Rickon. He could feel that Ghost knew about the fate of his brother. Since Shaggy Dog was gone, he needed to be the one to keep Rickon safe whenever Jon wasn't around. Currently, Jon was addressing all of the lords in the room. After being elected the king in the north, he had told all of them about the White Walkers and the army of the dead. He spoke of every important detail he could of what he knew, what happened at the first Hardhome, the Night King, and how Sam killed a White Walker with a dagger of dragonglass, and he killed one with Longclaw. Valyrian steel was something too rare and too few to rely on. Even with the houses of Vale supporting them, there were only about a dozen or more ancestral weapons of the steel. They needed to put their focus on a more resourceful material. I want every Northern Maester to scour their records for any mention of dragonglass. Dragonglass kills White Walkers. It's more valuable to us than gold. To find it, we need to mine it, and we need to make weapons from it. Everyone, ages 10 to 60, will drill daily with spears, pikes, bows, and arrows. The War of the Five Kings had decimated more than half of the North's true military strength. The odds were terrible against the dead, and to make them seem even possible of winning everyone who could fight would have to... It's about time we taught these boys of summer how to fight. Lord Glover jested. Not just the boys, Jon said, almost nervous knowing what he was ordering to happen. We can't defend the north if only half the population is fighting. Lord Glover stood up at Jon as if trying to intimidate him. You expect me to put a spear in my granddaughter's hand? Lady Mormont proved to be far more intimidating than Lord Glover tried to be. I don't plan on knitting by the fire while men fight for me. Jon allowed his lips to curve into a faint smile this one time. I might be small, Lord Glover, and I might be a girl, but I'm every bit as much a northerner as you. Indeed you are, my lady. No one is questioning, and I don't need your permission to defend the north. She looked over at Jon as if she was tired of Lord Glover. We'll begin training every man, woman, boy, and girl on Bear Island. The other lords banged their tables in agreement. Jon was grateful to have someone as loyal as she always impressed and knew that he wouldn't ask of something without a damn good reason. Jon resumed speaking his plans. My dragons are still young, barely a year old, but they have grown immensely. I think when the dead come, they might be large enough to ride. There were a few whispering to each other at how unbelievable it was to say that, but at the same time, the amazement, but even enough numbers could overwhelm them. Aegon the Conqueror lost one of his against the Dornish. We could easily lose one against the dead, and worse, the Night King might even be able to bring it back under his control. There was some fear that spread, but it was only small. Jon had to let them know that he knew how they are going to prepare, and be ready. While gathering our strength, we need to shore up our defenses. Now that the Dreadfort is under new lordship, we need men to garrison there to protect its people and support the northern forces. I want 50 men stationed and training others by the next full moon. Jon looked over to Tormund. The free folk will settle on the lands around and be taught how to fight like us. If it gets us further south of the wall, a better roof over our heads, you won't hear us saying no. Tormund replied, I gather the free folk who are still in the gift and send them to the Dreadfort. But I also need you to gather a few hundred men and go to East Watch and Castle Black. I've received some reports from the Lord Commander, then some of the wildlings are attacking the Night's Watch, believing it to be a trap. They need to see familiar faces they trust working with those they don't. And that's where I'll go. Looks like we're the Night's Watch now. Jon thought that was amusing, but couldn't let himself laugh. He could tell many of the other lords didn't like the sound of that. Jon waited for Tormund to sit down before resuming his announcements. Thanks to efforts of the Daenerys Targaryen, for this first time in hundreds of years, there are enough men that 3 more of the castles along the wall have been garrisoned once again, and more men from Essos continue to come to the north. There was a bit of discontent amongst the lords when they heard that. Foreigners manning the wall. It was unthinkable. Do you know how many men have come? Lord Glover asked. I was told around 2,000 so far. That's 2,000 foreigners being stationed at our northern flank. When the Mad King's daughter arrives in Westeros, she'll have them ready and waiting to attack. I was also told that only 1 out of 10 arriving are made a ranger because only 1 out of 10 can swing a sword and not fall over. The rest of them are either builders working to restore the castles or stewards, providing support to the rangers and teaching many of those who do not speak the common tongue how to speak it. They are also working on a larger fleet to ferry more supplies to the wall from Essos, which is relieving some of the weight from the north regarding our own supplies. I'll trust you, Your Grace, but I don't trust them. Lord Glover grumbled. You don't have to. You only need to hope that the wall doesn't fall. But if it should, the first 2 castles in the Army of the Dead's path are the Last Hearth and Carhold. Lord Royce had immediately stood up to voice his opinion, surprising to a few. The Umbers and the Corstarks betrayed the North. Their castles should be torn down with not a stone left standing. Such a thing was not uncommon in the history of Westeros. But to Jon, it was always curious as to why anyone would have castles torn down and land salted. It was just a waste. Sansa decided now was a better time than ever to get her word across. The castles committed no crimes, and we need every fortress we have for the war to come. We should give the Last Hearth and Carhold to new families. Loyal families that supported us against Ramsay. Many of the lords agreed with her idea. It made sense, after all. The last time a Karstark was given justice, their child retaliated against the North. The Umbers gave Rickon to Ramsay and betrayed their rightful lord. But it wasn't right. The Umbers and the Karstarks have fought beside the Starks for centuries. Jon objected. They've kept faith for generation after generation, and they broke faith when they aligned with the Boltons. She was angry and had a great right to be. She had more hate for the Boltons than Jon did, and the same went for those that allied with them. I'm not going to strip these families of their ancestral homes because of the crimes of a few reckless sons. So there's no punishment for treason and no reward for loyalty. There was a long silence that no one dared to break, Sansa seeking justice that was already delivered from it. Felt like the lives of the lords who committed treason against us were forfeit when they declared for Ramsay. Small Jon Umber died on the field of battle. Harold Karstark has renounced his titles and given his life to the Night's Watch. If they fought against us for the family that butchered ours for the Lannisters, give the castles to families who fought for us against the monster who shot an arrow into our brother. This earned many of the lords agreeing with her, but there were some of them muttered to each other in disagreement. Jon took a deep breath to keep himself calm about this. He agreed with her that the houses that were loyal and joined them in battle deserved to be rewarded, but not at the expense of robbing an innocent. When I was Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, I executed men who betrayed me. I executed men who refused to follow orders. My father always said the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword, and I have tried to live by those words, but I will not punish a son for his father's sins, and I will not take a family home away from a family who it has belonged to for centuries. Jon met his sister's gaze. That is my decision, and my decision is final. Sansa was angry at him. That much was obvious from just one look at her. Ned Umber, Jon called out. A boy as young as Lady Mormont stepped forward from his seat. He was nervous and had the right to be. Alice Karstark. Ned was joined by an older girl whose red hair was just as bright as Sansa's. Jon motioned them to step forward to the foot of the table, and they did as commanded. Anyone looking at them could see they both were ashamed and scared as they walked forward. For centuries, our fathers fought side by side on the battlefield. I ask you to pledge your loyalty once again to House Stark, to serve as our bannermen, and to come to our aid whenever called upon. The shame and nervousness vanished with the words of confidence given to them. The two of them drew their swords and bent the knee to Jon, looking more determined to face him. Stand, they did as they were ordered. Yesterday's wars don't matter anymore. The North needs to band together. All the living North, will you stand beside me, Ned and Alice, now and always? Now and always, they said in unison. The support of the Northern Lords was greater with Jon than it was with Sansa. At the end of the meeting was the start of an argument between Jon and Sansa. The position of the North was one that was in such a delicate hold now, and the only way to strengthen that hold was to strengthen the bonds with all the living North. They couldn't afford to make more enemies to add to the ones they already had. They hadn't left things on a strong note, but it felt like they were going in circles. Sansa reminded Jon about the foolish choices of their family that sealed their fates with death, and it was followed with a discussion about Cersei Lannister when the Raven from King's Landing arrived. There were so many problems that were starting to hold them from the important one coming for everyone in the entire country. It was so much to think about. Sansa took to her own to take care of matters in the castle, with Littlefinger taken to her company. He was always close to her presence, but more than a simple counselor would be. Sister Davos had joined Jon on the balconies away from everyone else in hopes of no intrusion. Heard Cersei wants you to bend the knee. Aye, so she can have her executioner take my head. We won't have to worry about her for now. The snows are setting in, and a southern army can't march on us with hopes of victory. No, but they could weaken our already small forces and fuck us more than we already are. I'm not sure how many we'll number in just the North, even with the elderly, women, and the children, but it won't be enough. We have the Vale on our side. The Knights here number 2,000. Another 6 are on their way. Our numbers won't be enough, you know this, but you need to hear it again so we can fix it. Fix it how? The Riverlands belong to House Frey, while Sansa's uncle is locked in a cell. There's no one else we can call on for help. No one that has ties with the North. But that can change. House Stark commands a great deal of respect now that it rules again, and so do you now that you're the king in the North. Some might take the chance to try and offer you a queen. Jon chuckled as he wished Ser Davos was joking at that. He didn't have time to find a wife. He needed to find allies and weapons. There's no time for that. It'll just be a distraction. If that's what it takes to get the army we have to grow, then I think it's very well worth it. Jon thought about it logically. Indeed, a marriage would seal him to another house that would now be sworn to him. But who? Cersei controls almost every country south of the Neck now. I don't think anyone would want to risk allying with us at the risk of her wrath. Aye, maybe they won't, but then again, maybe they will. If you wish it, I'll send out some ravens to some of the greater houses with eligible daughters. Never hurts to try. Jon had tried many things in the past that hurt greatly. Trying love led him to be shot full of arrows and broken-hearted, and trying to do the right thing led to him getting killed. But he needed more soldiers, many more. All right. And send one to the Citadel for Sam. See if he's found anything that can help. Ser Davos nodded and left quickly while Jon looked for a way to take his mind off of the stress of all the many problems arising. He had found his way, the gods would, with Rickon. He had a promise to keep now that his brother could get out of the castle. I'm so excited. Rickon was as giddy as he used to be. Jon wheeled him to the heart tree and positioned him next to it. They're a bit scary up close, so keep that in mind. Walked out to a clearing and looked up to where Juri and Loras were flying. He called out them, and they swiftly dove down from the sky. The two dragons, landing gently in the godswood, forming snow into the air with the flaps of their wings. Ygritte immediately moved to be nuzzled by Jon. Daenerys was patient and waited her turn. They were both so warm against the feel of Jon's touch. Daenerys, Jon spoke to them. This is Rickon, my little brother. He pointed over to Rickon, who was watching with absolute awe and wonder. Daenerys made the first move. Approaching Rickon, she slowly moved to him and inspected as much as she could with golden eyes. When she got close enough, she reached her head out and sniffed at him, starting at her legs and moving her way up his body. Rickon was now face to face with Daenerys. Jon couldn't stop smiling at the sight of it all. His brother was still very young at heart and didn't have the caution of danger that men had. Rickon reached his hand out, but Daenerys puffed smoke at him and returned to Jon. Did I do something wrong? Rickon asked as he became disappointed. Daenerys retreated to her sister, and the two of them returned into the skies. I'm not sure. I'm still trying to learn what I can about them. I only have a few books about dragons. I'm studying everything I can. Jon returned to Rickon and patted his shoulder very lightly. But give it some time, and they'll let you touch them. That put some joy back into Rickon. Still, they're amazing to see so close. I've never imagined them to look like that. They're so different from the pictures I've seen. You should have them be your sigil. My sigil? Jon inquired. I made you a lord, didn't I? You should take your own sigil since you can't have the great direwolf of House Stark. I think having the night dragons as it will be perfect. Them and Ghost. Jon looked at his brother skeptically. The night dragons? They were born in the eyes of the Night's Watch, weren't they? They're the night dragons. Jon thought that to be amusing, but it did have a certain ring to it. Aye, they are. Daenerys. Being in the halls of Dragonstone gave life to something sleeping in Daenerys. Not only was she absorbing the feelings of where she was born, but also of her Valyrian ancestry. This castle was the only one of its kind in all of Westeros, built by the Valyrians before the Doom. Stannis Baratheon had left things in a rather fine condition when he emptied his armies and himself from it, leaving behind only a few things that were gathering dust. It wasn't long before it was cleaned of any memory of him ever being there. The Unsullied were preparing for their journey to take Casterly Rock, and the other leaders of the armies had already made for their homes to rally their forces. Olenna would be assembling her troops at Highgarden, and Ilyara, and her daughters were on their way to collect the Dornish. The days that followed were plagued with storms. Tyrion had given an amusing little speech about Daenerys' birth, and Daenerys had confronted Varys about how his loyalties have been rather malleable in the past few years. But it was their guest that night that was the most surprising thing. Meeting the Red Priestess, Melisandre, was intriguing. She did not seem like any of the priests or priestesses Daenerys had heard about from Tyrion. And Varys, she didn't impose anything about the Lord of Light to her. What she said earlier about prophecies being dangerous, it felt like she had a new view of the powers of her god. She was given accommodations for stay at Dragonstone until she would return to Voltantis. Daenerys was walking in the castle halls with Lord Varys. Am I correct to assume that you did not know of the new king in the north, Lord Varys? Hearing the news of House Bolton's defeat and the rise of a bastard king from the priestess was almost enlightening to how much she was not paying heed to the status of her country. You are, your grace. In fact, with the Bolton rule, it seems my little birds have had difficulties singing their songs with all the savage acts being committed. There were roads and castles decorated with flayed corpses of any who were caught opposing Ramsay's claim. But now that things have taken a turn for the better in the north, I will be able to hear them soon. Good. How long will that wait be? Less than a fortnight. I would very much like to hear what your little birds sing about this, Jon Snow. I find it strange that one of his brothers of the Watch would tell me that they faced the danger of an army of wildlings, only to now learn that they were let through the wall. What kind of common enemy would unite wildlings with anyone south of the wall? I will spread the word and await the whispers, your grace. Is there anything else you would require of me? Not tonight. Get some rest. Lord Varys, we have much to do in the days to come. Varys bowed his head at Daenerys before he turned around and walked back where they came from. Daenerys was going to retire for the night as well. She needed all the sleep she could get. Missandei met Daenerys in her solar and helped her out of her robes and into her nightgown. She departed as soon as she was no longer needed and left her queen to her sleep. The storm outside would not let up anytime soon, and the noise of the thunder was as loud as the charging of the horses of her Dothraki horde. The air was cold and Daenerys couldn't wait to be in the warmth of her fur blankets. She doused the candles in her room, save one, and rested her body onto the softness of her mattress. Her eyes fell closed as if they were weighed down by stones. The darkness was comforting as she felt herself become lost in the void of a blissful sleep. One moment she was laying in her bed, but then the next moment she was on a hill that was covered in a thick sheet of snow, looking beyond at a castle. She could see smoke rising from inside, and was drawn closer to it. When she reached the gates, they opened for her and revealed the interior of a courtyard. Everything inside was covered in a layer of snow, yet smoke was emanating from it. The stone foundations were collapsed into rubble all around her, yet the castle still stood strong. As she walked through the disaster, she could hear the sounds of battle coming from a doorway that led underground into darkness. She followed the noise and entered the passageway. In the shadows, she could see a light far away, but it grew larger as she approached it with haste. She exited out of a tunnel and was in the courtyard of a different castle. The materials that made it was all black, and there was a lift leading up to the top of a wall of ice. She assumed that she was at Castle Black. The sounds of battle suddenly disappeared and were replaced by the sound of a man crying. Daenerys looked over in the center of the courtyard and saw a man dressed in dark armor fallen on his knees, holding someone in his arms, facing away from her. As she approached him, she took notice to his raven black hair and a sword next to him in the ground. It was Valyrian steel, but the blade was broken in the middle into two pieces. She was standing behind the man and saw the face of a woman he was cradling in his arms. She was dressed in animal furs and had fiery red hair, and her skin was pale as snow. An arrow pierced her chest, and blood was frozen down the shaft. Daenerys couldn't help but put her hand on the man's left shoulder to try and give comfort to him. She felt his bare right hand take hold of her gently. His skin felt warm. He didn't say anything or look at her. He just held her hand, and his holding on to him felt comforting to her as she hoped it did to him. Daenerys suddenly heard the roar of a lion behind her and immediately let go of the man and spun around. She found herself outside the entrance of the Red Keep. She looked back behind her and didn't see the man or Castle Black. Instead, she saw flowers before her, wilting away on the ground. They littered the ground by the tens of thousands and continued into the streets of King's Landing. She heard the roar again from behind her and looked back at the Red Keep. The large doors parted, and she was immediately transported to the throne room. Inside, the room had a light covering of snow, and the roof above her was damaged. She had seen this before in the House of the Undying. When she looked at the Iron Throne, she noticed something was different than the first time she saw it. The throne had an additional sword in it, but it was stabbed into the backing of the throne rather than forged as a part of it. Around the sword's handle was a golden hand holding on to the handle below the guard of the hilt, and a silver hand wrapped below it, ending at the pommel. She approached the Iron Throne and stretched out her hand to touch the sword. The moment her fingers felt the cold sword, it fell out of the throne, and all the swords that were forged into it came loose and clashed as they collapsed into a pile before her. Daenerys turned back around, hoping she would be taken somewhere away from where she was. But in front of her stood three people. On her left was her late husband, Drogo. He was covered in scars along his chest and neck. On her right was someone she'd never seen before, but knew who he was. His silver hair and violet eyes gave him away. Rhaegar looked much stronger and older than Viserys had. Holding his hand was a woman Daenerys didn't recognize. She looked the same age as Daenerys and very beautiful with long black hair stretching down her back. She wore a crown of blue roses on her head and gazed at her calmingly. The silence around all of them was broken by a rumbling coming from the floor. Daenerys heard the roaring of a lion once more, but it sounded as if the lion was rabid. The light outside the Red Keep began to turn green. The stone floor began to crack, and before Daenerys could guess what was happening, she and those before her were surrounded by green flames. Daenerys' body shot forwards as she woke up from her dream. Her breathing was heavy, and she was sweating from her entire body. Her room was lit by the light of the morning entering from her windows. She began to calm down slowly and remember that it was only a dream, and yet it all seemed so real. She heard a knock on her door. "Come in," she said. The door opened and Missandei walked in. She stopped when she saw the state Daenerys was in. "Are you all right, my queen?" Daenerys nodded. "Just a bad dream." "I'll have a bath drawn for you, your grace." Missandei left her to go get what she needed. It was later that Missandei was helping her bathe in the warm water, cleaning her body of the sweat. "What did you dream about?" she asked. Daenerys wanted to tell her, but when she tried to recall what she saw, she couldn't remember all of it. The only thing she could remember was the feeling of the man's hand. It was warm and soft. "I can't remember." Several days had passed since she had her dream, and Daenerys had too many things on her mind at the time to focus on it. But it was becoming so much that she needed to take a break and collect herself. Being with her dragons was one of the few things that gave Daenerys a peace of mind. She sat in the fields outside Dragonstone, watching Rhaegal and Viserion flying out over the horizon, while Drogon was curled up behind her, resting. The winds were cold, and came from the north. Even though she was thousands of miles away from the north, she accepted that the Starks were always right. Winter is coming. Daenerys was thinking about her uncle Aemon's promise in his letter to her. "You will not be alone. There is another who has the blood of the dragon in his veins." That last part had her thinking. In his veins, there was a man descended from the blood of Valyria, like she was. If the Baratheons were still alive, she would have thought Aemon meant one of them, but she felt it wasn't so. The last 3 true Baratheon kings were the grandchildren of a Targaryen, and descended from Orys Baratheon, rumored to be a bastard half-brother to Aegon, the Conqueror. But the Baratheons and the other house of Valyria that lived in Westeros were never considered to be the blood of the dragon, only House Targaryen. Daenerys couldn't imagine who or where this man was. Could it be a surviving descendant of the line of Blackfyre or one of the other Targaryen branches that were wiped out? Every day since she received the letter, there has been a burning desire within her to find her last remaining kin. But right now, she had to focus on the wars to come and prepare herself to meet Jon Snow, if he accepted her invitation. Today was the day Varys would be able to enlighten her on the situation in the north. She felt Drogon lift his head and look over to Missandei as she approached her. He snorted and rested his head back to the ground, not giving a care about her. Daenerys stood up as soon as Missandei reached her and brushed off some grass on her robes. "Your Grace," she said, "Lord Varys requests your presence at the painted table. The first reports from the north have come." Finally, Daenerys thought as she began walking with Missandei to the castle. It took quite a while, but when they reached the painted table, Varys and Tyrion were already seated. "What did your little bird sing to you?" Varys didn't reply immediately, as if he was nervous about what he had to say. They confirmed that Jon Snow is king in the north. He leads the Northern Lords, the Wildings, and the Knights of the Vale. He was named the new Lord of the Dreadfort, and his sister Sansa Stark is the Lady of Winterfell. And Wardeness of the North after their brother Rickon Stark gave up his titles to her. Tyrion was the one who was more surprised than anyone else. "Bit ironic, isn't it?" he quipped. Everyone turned their gaze to him as he explained Ramsay Bolton rose to be the Lord of Winterfell through fear, but Jon Snow rose to be the king in the north through the loyalty of the other lords. Just proves that there's more to bastards than we estimate. He's the greatest of them all. Daenerys was slightly impressed at that, but not enough for her to be intimidated. "What I wish to know is how a man sworn into the Night's Watch still has his head after breaking his vows." "The details are muddled, your grace," Varys informed. "The only information I have been able to acquire so far is that he was released. There was a mutiny that failed, and after the execution of the officers who were responsible, Jon Snow had ended his watch. It sounds like he could not stand betrayal from within. How does that qualify as a just reason to be allowed to leave? I will have my birds look further into the matter. The Wall has been one of the few places I have never had need of them, due to their non-involvement in the matters of the realm." Varys paused. He was not finished, and almost worried about what else he had to say. "There is something else, your grace." Daenerys turned her gaze back. Varys waiting for him to speak. He took a moment to take in a deep breath before saying something that shocked them all. "My spies informed me that Jon Snow is not only called king in the north, but a few other titles as well, the White Wolf for his red-eyed direwolf." Ghost Tyrion commented, his was the runt of a litter he found with his brothers. The last time I saw the beast, it was as big as a wolf could be. I imagine he's fully grown now. What else do they say about him? Daenerys asked. They also call him the Winter Dragon. Daenerys wanted to feel angry that someone who was not the blood of old Valyria would dare let themselves have the titles of dragon, but she was too curious. What has earned him such a title as that? I'm still learning the details of how, Your Grace, but I've learned that Jon Snow is in possession of 2 dragons of his own. Tyrion spat his wine. He was sipping back into his cup while Daenerys and Missandei were speechless. When the Battle of the Bastards seemed lost, they flew in from the north and set fire to the Bolton soldiers. The only ones they approach are Jon Snow and his family, but only when he is with them. The line of the letter repeated in her mind over and over, "You will not be alone. There is another with the blood of the dragon in his veins." Could Jon Snow be the one her uncle meant? Daenerys started to fall backward from shock, but Missandei was able to catch her. "Your Grace!" She slowly sat Daenerys down on the floor and knelt down to her as Tyrion and Varys both rose from their seats. "Are you all right?" She wasn't. Her head was spinning at the thought of what she had just heard. Jon Snow, a bastard of the North, the king in the North. She felt lightheaded before everything became dark. In the darkness, she could hear someone singing a song. It was a man. His voice was rough and deep, but the song was beautiful to hear. "Though the winds of winter blow, they will never scare the crow. For when the king comes striking down, our steel will break his crown, and then the skies will fill with light. Our brothers have won the fight, and then the one who was lost shall win. And the greatest of ages shall begin. The wolves will howl, and the dragons cry. Through fire and ice we will never die." Daenerys woke up in her bed. She was surrounded by Tyrion, Missandei, and Varys. "Your Grace," Missandei spoke quietly, "are you feeling any better?" She was still concerned with this new revelation. She needed counsel, and none of them could give it to her, since she was the only one who had the knowledge that she did. But that was about to change. "Lord Tyrion," she called. "Yes, Daenerys. In my trunk, over by the corner, is a small box. Inside you will find a letter. Would you bring it to me?" Of course. Tyrion walked over to the trunk and opened it. He dug around inside until he finally pulled out a small wooden box. He opened the lid and removed the letter from inside and set it back in the trunk. He walked over to Daenerys, handing it to her. She shook her head. "I want you to read it with Varys and Missandei." Tyrion looked over at them and back to her, puzzled. He walked over to them and they hunched over to see what the letter said. Daenerys could tell when they read what was at the bottom. When they finished, Tyrion was the only one who wasn't speechless. "He never ceases to amaze me." Daenerys couldn't help but slightly regret revealing what she knew to them. What should I do? She needed someone to answer her, because she really didn't know what to do. "Nothing," Tyrion replied. Varys and Missandei were surprised at that suggestion. "Nothing? Why should I do nothing?" "Forgive me, Your Grace, I should clarify what I meant. Do not tell him about this until you think you should." "And why would I think not to? He could be my only kin left in the world." "I understand, but until we read this just now, we were not sure of Jon Snow's intentions for the North. We still aren't. Revealing this to him might change those intentions and who he's aiming to be. I like him as a person. He's as honorable as his father. Let him show you who he is before you tell him who he is. Get a better perspective on him first, and in due time, you tell him. What if he doesn't decide to come to meet with me?" "He already has. While you were passed out, we received a raven from him. He's agreed to meet with you, but when he arrives, do not treat him as your blood. Treat him as Jon Snow, the king in the North who will bend the knee. Let him see who you are as well. Daenerys Targaryen, the rightful queen." Daenerys took a few deep breaths before responding. "How long until he arrives?" Tyrion looked over to Varys, who gave the answer. "He'll arrive in a fortnight, Your Grace." "Then we better prepare ourselves for him." "Jon." There was much disagreement with the Northern Lords after Jon told them he would be traveling to Dragonstone. He did his best to make them understand why he would go, but they didn't seem to care. They were stubborn, and it made Jon upset inside. He never saw them act that way at his father. Robb had faced the same doubts as king in the North, but the circumstances were opposite. Robb was ridiculed for not returning north to defend it from Ironborn, and Jon was being challenged for leaving to seek allies to help them protect the north from the dead. In a way, he felt the same way about the south as they did, but more in the sense that his attention had to be focused in the north. It would be the first of all the Seven Kingdoms to be attacked by the White Walkers if they found a way through the wall. The north was always the first to suffer the hardships of what came beyond, while the rest of the kingdoms were squabbling over petty things. But none of that would matter, nor would who ruled over the other when the dead come. Jon had spent some time whenever he got the chance to mentally prepare himself. It wasn't the journey, it was the woman he would be going to meet. Maester Aemon never said anything about his niece to him, but he had talked about her to Sam, and then he heard much about her from Grenn as well before he was killed. From all he was told, Daenerys sounded like a good woman. She put an end to slavery in Slaver's Bay, or as it was now called, the Bay of Dragons, and was loved by her people when she ruled. But then there were the parts that made him nervous. She commanded an army of 2 mighty factions and 3 grown dragons that could wipe them out in a day. And Daenerys did not take kindly to rebels, which in technical terms is what Jon and the men of the North were. But if he could convince her to join them in the fight that mattered, then it might just be enough. Jon was sitting next to Rickon, who was confined to his bed, looking over one of the books left by Maester Walcan. His brother was finally well enough that he could start walking, but he was bedridden and recovering from an accident that hurt his wound greatly. Ghost was lying down at the foot of the bed. "You been reading enough?" Jon asked as he looked over the spine of the book at the title Foundations of Grammar. "I feel like I've been reading more than any Maester who ever lived," Rickon said, a disappointed look. "I have a friend who would greatly prove you and any Maester who ever lived wrong. He's studying at the Citadel right now, and it wouldn't surprise me if he's read everything in the whole library by now. It's not that I hate reading, it's just the books are about saying things properly. Don't worry, you'll get to all the tales of knights and dragons later. Took me till I was 8 until Maester Luwin let Robb and I read those kinds of books. I want to read about the legends of the giants and the children of the forest. I want to know more about what used to be north of the wall. The things that everyone thought just to be stories made to scare us. I want to know how many of them aren't just that." His pursuit for that kind of knowledge did impress Jon. He hardly recognized his brother at times. He wasn't a little boy that played with him and their brothers and their direwolves. His time running from Ironborn and Boltons had hardened him like the men of the North. In a way, it was tragic that it was happening to him so early. Jon set the book down and folded his hands. "I'm not sure how long I'll be gone for, but I promise you that I will return. I wish you wouldn't leave. Maester Luwin once told me and Bran that Starks never fare well when they travel south. He was right, of course." Jon looked to his brother, seeing the worry he had. "Then it's a good thing I'm a bastard." "We have the same father, which makes you a Stark, by blood." Rickon looked at the ground momentarily, as if thinking on something. "When father died, did my mother stop being a Stark?" Jon shook his head. "Then she was wrong to go south, too." As a bastard of another woman, Jon had always done his best to not be a problem for Lady Catelyn. She always looked at him with hatred, and he never had any desire to be in her good graces. But still, it was an evil way that she had to die. She didn't deserve that, and she didn't deserve to be taken from her children. "Will you bring Ghost with you?" Rickon asked. Ghost's head rose up when he heard his name. "If I brought him with me, who would be here to protect you?" Rickon looked discouraged when Jon asked him that. "Osha thought she could protect me when the Umbers turned on us. Now she's dead. I don't want you to die." Jon never met the wildling named Osha. He was only told about her in previous visits to Rickon. "I'm sorry about what happened to her and Shaggy Dog, but Ramsay is dead. The Bolton men were all prepared to kill you, but now they're gone, and the Stark men are all prepared to protect you just as much as Ghost will." Jon stood up and walked to the door. He retrieved something he left just outside the room as a surprise. He returned to Rickon's side and began to unwrap the cloth that concealed his gift, and soon enough they won't have to. Jon unveiled the object and revealed couldn't hold back his joy when he saw the wonder in Rickon's eyes when his brother beheld a long sword in a black and brown scabbard. The top half of the scabbard was wrapped in dark brown leather straps above the black covering. On the bottom half was the Stark direwolf sigil stamped into the black leather. The design of the sword was the same as their father's broadsword. I gave Arya her first sword before I left for Castle Black, and now I'm giving you your first sword before I leave for Dragonstone. Jon held the handle towards Rickon's right arm, waiting for him to grab it. Rickon's fingers wrapped around the wood of the handle, and he pulled the blade out of the scabbard, Jon pulling backward to make it easier for him. He could see it was very heavy for Rickon to hold, but he was able to raise it up in front of him. The sword was nearly identical from what Jon remembered. The only difference was the rise on the hilt wasn't as long. It's amazing. Rickon kept looking at the sword in wonder and amazement. I know you're not healed enough to wield it yet, but with your size and enough practice, you'll be swinging it in no time. Jon held the scabbard out to Rickon as the blade was returned to the scabbard. Jon placed the sword up against Rickon's bedpost and knelt down next to his bed near him. We will survive the war to come, little brother. Jon carefully embraced his brother, being cautious of his injury. He held him for a long moment before releasing him and giving his little brother and his direwolf one last smile before he left the room. He had less than an hour before he was going to leave, but there were still others he had to see first. The isolation of the crypts was a bit welcoming, strangely enough. As a king now, Jon rarely had moments to himself these days. But down where it was silent, with no one but himself to utter a sound, it felt peaceful. He stood before the crypt that was made for Robb. It didn't look like him. It looked older, and his beard was thicker than what Jon remembered about him, though in the 3 years before his death, Robb would have changed enough. Unlike the other statues of the previous Lords of Winterfell, Robb did not have an iron copy of ice. He carried no sword. Only his direwolf, Greywing, stood with him. Jon went to the statue next to Robb's and looked upon the image of their father. This one didn't look like right either. Father's skin was not a smooth look as the stone made it look, and the statue was empty of emotion. He caught a glimpse of his Aunt Lyanna's statue. The candles lit around her, and the shadows made it so that hers was the only one to have any sort of emotion behind the eyes of stone. For a moment, Jon felt as if the statue was watching him. Am I doing the right thing? Jon asked in thought to the statue, hoping that his father's ghost might hear him. Am I making the right choice? The last time he was faced in a situation like this, the choice he made got him killed. But still, he was the king, and he would do what he believed to be best for his people. He just hoped that his father would guide him through it. He stood there with longing for his family to be back with him, to help him where Sansa and Ser Davos couldn't. Jon had just left the crypts after his exchange with Littlefinger. He was in a small fit of anger, but it disappeared when all of a sudden Ygritte and Lyaras flew down into the courtyard he was in, the last ones he meant to see before leaving. The people around them backed away and the horses began to fuss, still not used to their presence. Jon, however, was unfazed and gladdened at them as the two dragons approached him. He seemed to calm down when he saw them and began to pet at their heads. He knelt down to them and they seemed to give him questioning eyes. I promised you too that I wouldn't abandon you ever again, but I can't bring you with me. I'm not sure how you would react around other dragons, but the ones I'm going to see are near 10 times the size of you. So instead, I need you two to do something important for me. They both screeched quietly, as if asking him what. Keep my family safe. Jon stood up and his dragons both returned to the sky. By this time, Davos and his guards were waiting for him to leave Winterfell with them. Before Jon mounted his horse, he was stopped by somebody calling out to him. You really are your father's son. The voice sounded much like Mance Rayder's, but not as old. Jon turned around and saw an older lord approaching him. He had short brown hair and a thick beard that was starting to gray. He wore dark orange leathers underneath his heavy brown cloak. At the base of his neck was a lizard lion of darkened iron, the Lord's sigil, Lord Howland of House Reed. King Jon Snow of House Stark, or have you chosen to have your own name now that you're the Lord of the Dreadfort? I'll decide that if we win the war and still breathe to care for such things. Jon recalled the first words Lord Reed said to him. If I may ask, how is being with my dragons remind you of Ned Stark? Lord Reed chuckled and stepped closer to Jon. I can tell you don't want to leave Winterfell, you don't want to leave the North, and neither do the other lords want you to. So why are you going? Because I have to. No, you don't. You're the king in the North. You can choose whether or not to stay or to go. So why are you going? Lord Reed was really challenging Jon, just like when Mance Rayder asked why he wanted to be part of the Free Folk. We've already lost so many lives in the last war. The Battle of the Bastards took the lives of a great part of the North's remaining fighting strength. If we do win the war by ourselves, by some sheer miracle of a chance, we can't afford to face an army just as powerful from the South. I'm tired of all the death, Lord Reed. I'm tired of all the fighting people do for a fucking chair of swords. I'm going down to Dragonstone to make sure that won't happen. Because it's the right thing to do, and that's all the reason I need. Lord Reed seemed impressed with his answer. The other lords think you're heading to your death, but I feel we'll be surprised. Jon was leaving with the knowledge that this could be the last time he sets foot in Winterfell. But he needed to do this, if not for him, for them. I hope I am as well. Lord Reed smiled when Jon spoke to him. It's been too long since I saw you last. To see what you have become is amazing. Jon tilted his head to Lord Reed. Forgive me, my lord, but I can't recall if we have ever met at all. The first day I met you was also the day Ned Stark met you. And now here you are, a king of dire wolves and dragons. Lord Reed looked up at the dragons circling overhead when he said that. He looked back at Jon, still having a smile on his face. Your mother would have been proud of you. This froze Jon down to his bones. Did Lord Howland know her? Did he ever meet her or see her? He then realized what he just said would have. She's dead? Jon asked, looking to the ground. The smile fell from Lord Howland's face. She died shortly after you were born. I never saw her when she did, but I did know her. Jon had so many questions, but he turned his gaze to Ser Davos and saw him waiting for him. Jon couldn't help but laugh a little. He looked up at Lord Howland, returning a smile. I'm afraid if I might never leave, if we continue to talk. There are so many things I want to know, but I need to go now. Lord Howland chuckled and placed an arm on Jon's shoulder. The next we see each other, we'll talk about your mother. Jon felt a bit scared when he heard that. Those were the last words his father said to him. I look forward to it, my lord. Lord Reed removed his arm and bowed his head, as do I, my king. Jon mounted his horse and made his way to the gate. Before he left, he could see Sansa watching from a balcony above him. He waved his hand to her and she waved back, as he and his men galloped out of Winterfell. The journey to White Harbor was cold and dreary. When Jon was a boy, the snows that fell over Winterfell made him and his siblings happy. They would spend hours playing in the snow each day, but now they had all grown up. Instead of wanting to play in the snow, Jon wanted to survive it. The first night that came, Jon and his company had made it to Castle Serwyn, where they would spend the night before continuing tomorrow at first light. If their horses weren't bred in the north, it would have taken them days longer to reach the White Harbor than they would be. Jon was in the castle's great hall, eating venison with Davos. He was in the middle of chewing a piece of his food when he was interrupted by the Onion Knight. Who was the lord you spoke to before we left? Jon could tell that Davos was only asking because he had nothing else to do. He swallowed his food before answering Lord Howland of House Reed. What was he talking to you about? Don't go to your death? Actually, I think he was saying the opposite. Davos brought a mug full of ale to his lips and took a long drink. He brought the mug down and wiped his beard with his sleeve. First Lord I know of that wants you to meet the Dragon Queen. I don't think he wanted me to go. I feel like he knew I had to. I noticed you seemed a bit distraught at something he said. Jon didn't answer immediately. He grabbed his own ale and took a very long swig of it. He practically slammed his mug on the table when he finished. I'll tell you when we get to Dragonstone. Sansa. Looking at the sword that leaned up against Rickon's bed made Sansa feel happy. It looked just like the one her father had. Jon was doing his best to keep their spirits high even when he wasn't there. But it didn't change the discontent she felt about him leaving. It felt so impulsive of him to do that she would do her duty and rule in his stead. Sansa was nearly down with the finishing touches on the cloak she had been making for Rickon these past few days. She glanced up from her work and saw that Rickon was attempting to stand up from his bed on his own. He could move his legs just fine, but the movement of his upper body seemed to be what was causing him pain still. Had he not had his accident, he wouldn't be in so much pain as he already was. Eventually, he managed to get up, but the feeling of accomplishment felt drowned by the amount of groaning he did. How do you feel? She asked, ready to jump at it if anything happened. It feels better, but it hurts when my left shoulder moves anywhere. It hurts when it moves at all, really. You should wear a sling to keep your arm from swaying. Rickon had insisted on getting out of bed and walking around Winterfell with her. I know you're getting stronger, but you shouldn't be out of bed until the pain dulls down. Rickon looked over to her, upset. I've been in a cell for months until you and Jon took back Winterfell, and I'm sick and tired of being confined. I just want to walk around a bit and get some fresh air. He picked up a brown leather tunic and attempted to put it on over his shirt. Before he could even get one arm in, he groaned as he winced back from pain. He looked over to his sister, seeming disappointed. Can you help me, please? Sansa sighed as she walked over to Rickon and slipped his right arm inside the tunic and slowly maneuvered the other side onto his body. She then did the laces and secured it snugly on him. Lift up your legs while I get your boots. Rickon put his right arm on her to steady himself as she slipped each boot onto his feet. She then did his gloves, before calling for Maester Walken. Could you get us an arm sling, Maester? Yes, my lady, I'll only be a minute. Maester Walken darted out of the room and momentarily came back with a proper sling. Sansa allowed the Maester to dress it on Rickon since she did not know the proper way to do it. And now, for the finishing touch. Sansa walked over to a regular chair and picked up the finished cloak for Rickon. She lifted it up high and let the cloak fly over his back as the pelt fell onto his shoulders. She carefully did the straps and took a few steps back to look at him. She couldn't help but smile at her little brother. If you had a beard, you'd look just like father. Rickon laughed lightly with her as they walked out of his room together. When they got outside, there was a light snowfall around them that was very comforting. They walked together through the main courtyard. Rickon was looking all around as if he had never seen the castle before. It doesn't feel the same, said Rickon. There's too much that's different. No, there isn't, Sansa politely objected. There are many parts that have been rebuilt, but it's all the same. Too many new faces. Where's Tommy and his daughter? Or Mikken or Farlin? All of the Pool daughters, they're all gone from here. Sansa knew of some who were murdered in the sacking of Winterfell, and of those killed at King's Landing. Some of them are at the Dreadfort. The time they spent as prisoners took a toll on their bodies. They'll come back, don't worry. I hope so. I miss them. Me too. Sansa looked over her shoulder and found a pair of red eyes looking back at her and Rickon. I think someone's waiting for you. She gestured down to where Ghost waited silently for them. Seeing him brought Rickon's spirits up. They were approached by the last of the direwolves. They knew to be alive. Ghost met them, received a gentle scratch behind the ears from Rickon. I'm glad that you're still with us. At least. As they walked through the areas of Winterfell, followed closely by Ghost, they caught the eyes of many of the residents staring at them. Most of them came from Wintertown, while others were asked to be here by their lords. Sansa could feel the happiness that the Starks seemed to give to the elderly ones who saw them. It made her feel warm when she remembered that this was what Winterfell used to be. Have you seen the dragons at all today? Rickon asked. I want to try approaching them again. They've gone off to hunt, I think. They haven't been sticking close to Winterfell since Jon left. Sansa could tell Rickon was disappointed. He'd only caught glimpses of them through his window. Seeing them up close would be difficult. The dragons usually kept to themselves when they weren't with Jon. She had only touched them once, and they seemed to like her. One of the Stark guards approached the two of them, interrupting their walk. Lady Sansa. The guard suddenly noticed Rickon next to her, and almost panicked for not noticing him earlier. Lord Rickon, your presence is requested by Maester Walken, Lord Royce, and Lord Baelish. Thank you, we'll be joining them shortly. Rickon asked, if you're going to be Lord of Winterfell someday, you'll need to learn responsibilities that go with it. They both followed the guard up to the balconies where the other lords and Maester were waiting for them. The guard left them as soon as they reached the lords. Littlefinger was the first to say something, as he always was. Lady Sansa, thank you for joining us. And Lord Rickon, it's wonderful to see you recovering so quickly. Thank you, Lord Baelish, Rickon replied. Baelish, he corrected, with an amused smirk on his face. He turned his gaze to Sansa. We're now just receiving the sums of wheat. The north is farmed over the summer. Littlefinger turned his gaze to the courtyard, gesturing the others to look as well. There were many carts filled with wheat entering into the castle. How much do we have? Sansa inquired. 4,000 bushels, my lady, Maester Walken answered. What does that mean? Lord Royce seemed to know the numbers better as he was the one who answered. For the current occupants of the castle, it's enough food for a year, perhaps more. Sansa began to walk along the balcony with Rickon and the other lords. She made sure her brother was listening attentively. And what's the longest winter in the past 100 years? I'm not entirely certain, Maester Walken said. I'll check Maester Luwin's records. He kept a copy of every Raven scroll. They were slowly making their way down the stairs, being cautious for Rickon. You're telling me we don't have enough food, especially not if the armies of the north come back to defend Winterfell. Maester Wolcan seemed hesitant to confirm her statement. No, my lady, most likely not. Then we must prepare for that eventuality. Whatever direction the threat comes from, this is the best place to be. We need to start building up our grain stores with regular shipments from every keep in the north. If we don't use it by winter's end, we'll give it back to them. But if the entire north has to flee to Winterfell, then they won't have time to bring wagon loads of grain with them. Very wise, my lady. Lord Royce commented. Maester Wolcan, will you see to that? We should ask the wildlings to help too, Rickon commented. All eyes turned to him. They've lived their entire lives without a single season of spring, so they should know some things about surviving winter far better than us, I bet. He makes a fair point, Lord Baelish agreed. If the wildlings are to live in the north now, they should start earning their keep. Agreed, Sansa said. See to it that a meeting with the clan elders is arranged for later today. Maester Wolcan bowed his head and departed from their group as he entered the armorer's corner of the castle. Sansa stopped and watched a smith hammering down a steel breastplate and had a realization. Are they covering those breastplates in leather? No, my lady, Lord Royce said.
Shouldn't they be?
Once the real cold comes. This was only the beginnings of winter after all. They should indeed, pardon me, my lady. Lord Royce broke off from the four of them and approached the smiths as they continued to walk around the castle. Rickon tugged on Sansa's cloak to get her attention. Can I stay with Lord Royce? I want to watch the smiths make the armor. She was hesitant at first, but then she remembered that Rickon was still only a boy. To stay with him at all times until I'm done. All right? Rickon smiled at her and walked with Ghost back to the smiths, and Lord Royce, the only one left with her, was unfortunately Littlefinger. Command suits you. The Northerners are all facing north, worried about the threat from beyond the wall, so they should be. I know Cersei better than anyone here. Sansa always felt like Littlefinger was always impressed with himself with everything he said, yet he didn't spend years at a time with her watching his every move. If you turn your back at her, you don't know Cersei better than anyone here. I only meant to say that the woman who murdered my father, mother, and brother is dangerous. Thank you for your wise counsel. She was tired of him constantly trying to prod at her with his words. Littlefinger did seem a bit irritated for a moment, but his composure didn't break. One of two things will happen. Either the dead will defeat the living, in which case all our troubles come to an end. He stepped in front of her to try and raise the value of the point he was trying to get across. Or life will win out. And what then? Don't fight in the north or the south. Fight every battle, everywhere, always, in your mind. Everyone is your enemy. Everyone is your friend. Every possible series of events is happening all at once. Sansa seemed to understand little of what he said, but more of how Littlefinger played the game. Live that way and nothing will surprise you. Everything that happens will be something that you see before. Their conversation was broken by a guard running towards them. Lady Sansa, he called out. She was startled when he addressed her. At the gate. Sansa looked back at Littlefinger, wishing she hadn't when she saw a small smile on his face before she left with the guard. As they approached the gates, Sansa noticed many people were crowding around a wagon that had just entered. She made her way around to the back and lost all the air in her lungs when she saw who was in it. He looked so different, but she recognized Bran immediately. His gaze turned at her, and he seemed to be unsurprised to see her. She couldn't seem to say anything. She was lost for words. For a brief moment, she could see a smile come upon him, but it faded away as soon as it appeared. Hello, Sansa. To hear his voice made her eyes begin to tear up. She couldn't help but jump up to him and hug him. She didn't care if people could see her crying. She was happy and didn't want anyone to take that away from her. Bran! Rickon voices sounded behind them as he immediately climbed onto the wagon, carefully and hugged his brother. I knew you'd come back to us. They let of Bran and Rickon, looked over to a girl Sansa didn't know. She was dressed like a wildling, but she didn't look like one. Mira! Rickon slowly climbed off and quickly went to hug her as well. Hello, Rickon, she whispered out to him. Mira, a low voice bellowed out. Sansa looked over to one of the lords, shoving people aside as he approached the wagon. As soon as he made it to the girl, Rickon let go of her as the lord embraced her. Father, she seemed to be on the verge of tears. Jojen. It's all right, Mira. Jojen told me you wouldn't be coming home when you both left. He knew what he was getting into. He looked down at her. His face was both sad and happy. I couldn't be any prouder of you than I am now. Howland Reed, Bran, softly spoke. The Lord looked up from his daughter and to Bran. We have a lot to talk about. Sansa had arranged for Bran and Meera to have better clothes brought to them. The cloaks of rabbit furs looked warm, but not warm enough. Bran wanted to be brought next to the weirwood tree in the Godswood, and Meera seemed to accompany him wherever he went. They were joined by Rickon before Sansa had asked Meera to give them some time alone. Sansa was sitting down with Rickon while Bran sat up against the weirwood tree. "I wish Jon were here," she announced openly. "Yes, I need to speak to him." She wasn't expecting that kind of reaction from him. But now that she looked at him, she could see that he didn't really react to anything. He seemed to be staring out into the distance, as if something was there. Rickon broke the silence that seemed to follow. "Bran, you're the older brother, and you're the next son after Robb." Bran's gaze finally turned to them. "You're the Lord of Winterfell now." "I can never be Lord of Winterfell," he said. "I can never be Lord of anything. I'm the Three-Eyed Raven." "I thought the Three-Eyed Raven was beyond the wall," Rickon said, confused. He died, and now I'm what he was." Sansa looked at the two of them, very confused. "I don't know who that is. It's difficult to explain. Try, please, for me." Bran looked at her so emptily. "The Three-Eyed Raven isn't really a person, it's a gift. I can see everything. Everything that's ever happened. Everything that's happening right now. It's all pieces now. Fragments. I need to learn to see better. When the long night comes again, I need to be ready." There was screech coming above them all. The dragons had flown down into the Godswood. They began to approach Bran, seeming curious. Sansa only saw them get close to Jon the way they were now. "Ygritte and Lyaris," Bran said. The two dragons seemed to cry out to him in excitement when he said their names. He turned his head to Rickon. "You wanted to see them today. Now's your chance. They won't hurt you." Rickon looked at them nervously. Sansa knew all too well the excitement you have when you want to do something, and then the fear of actually doing it. The dragons slowly made their way to Rickon. Quietly screeching at him, he extended his hand at his fingers brushed against Lyaris's snout. He let out a small laugh of joy as he continued to pet the blue dragon. Ygritte approached Ghost, eyeing the direwolf with her fiery amber eyes before looking at Sansa and coming to her. The white dragon purred softly as she sniffed at the knees of Sansa's dress. This was the first time in a long while she got to be near the dragons again. Seeing them always marveled her greatly. "They're much bigger than last I got this close," she said. "They grow at a fast rate, faster than Daenerys Targaryen's dragons," Bran told them. "In a few more months, they'll be rideable. It's the magic that's doing it." "What?" Sansa asked. "Dragons feed on magic as well as food. The dragons of Valyria were so large because all the magic that the Valyrians possessed, there isn't as much of it in the north. But the Night King seems to give off some himself, and the weirwood trees contain their own form of it. The children of the forest put it there when they carved the faces into them." "How do you know all this?" "The Three-Eyed Raven showed me when the dragons were born." Sansa remembered that Rickon said that there was a Three-Eyed Raven beyond the wall. "The one before you." "Yes. How?" "I told you, it's difficult to explain." "Bran, I'm sorry for all that's happened to you. I'm sorry it had to happen here, in our home." Sansa fell silent. How did he know of her time here when the Boltons ruled? She didn't tell him about it yet. It was so beautiful that night. Snow falling just like now. Sansa was starting to feel scared. "And you were so beautiful in your white wedding dress." She never told anyone the details of the wedding. Just thinking about that night made her uneasy. "I have to go back inside, Bran." Sansa stood up as quick as she could, not wanting to hear any more of what he would say to prove his point. "I'll stay a bit longer." "I'll stay with him," Rickon said. Sansa was already gone from them. She wanted to be happy that her brother was back, but in her heart, it no longer felt that he was. It felt like a stranger wearing his face was here instead.